Welcome to Anictionif. Today's story will he on one of our subscribers' requests. What if Issei was reincarnated as Commander Azurlane and got Harem? Let's begin. Act I, The Commander Rises. Chapter 1, A Shore of White Sand and Strange Stars. The last thing Issei Reborn remembered was light. Not the warm amber glow of a setting sun, not the flickering candles of the Occult Research Club's clubroom. It was a white so absolute and total that it pressed against him like a physical weight, folding him inward, silencing every noise, every memory, every heartbeat until there was nothing left to silence. And then there was sand. Cold, fine-grained sand pressed against his cheek when he finally stirred. The smell of salt hung heavy in the air. A rhythmic crashing sound filled his ears, steady and indifferent, the voice of an ocean that cared nothing for a boy who had no business being on its shore. He pushed himself upright slowly, blinking. His hands shook. His whole body felt like it had been dismantled and reassembled by someone who had only read a description of a human being and done their best. Every muscle ached. His sacred gear arm throbbed with a dull, distant pulse that felt more like a memory than a sensation. He was wearing his Co-Academy uniform. It was soaked through, the dark fabric clinging to his skin. His tie was gone. His shoes were missing. His hair was plastered flat against his forehead by what he assumed was seawater. Where, he started. His voice came out rough and thin, barely a sound at all. He swallowed, tried again. Where am I? No one answered. The ocean simply kept crashing. He looked around. A wide beach stretched in both directions, the sand pale enough to look almost white in the gray pre-dawn light. Behind him, a line of thick tropical trees rose in a solid wall of green shadow. In front of him, the sea churned under a sky still dark enough to show a handful of stubborn stars. The stars were wrong. He stared upward, squinting. He was no astronomer, but he had spent enough late nights lying on the roof of Reborn residence studying his sister's old constellation chart to recognize the arrangement that was supposed to be above Japan at this time of year. What was above him now bore no resemblance to anything in that chart. Different stars. Different positions. A different sky entirely. Okay, he said quietly, to himself, to the empty beach, to whatever force of the universe had landed him here. Okay. That is either very bad or extremely bad. He got to his feet. It took 2 attempts. His legs felt like badly poured concrete, uncertain of their own shape. He stood at the edge of the water and breathed in the salt air and tried very hard to think clearly. He was alive. That was genuinely surprising given what he remembered happening immediately before the white light. He was on a beach that was not in any geography he recognized. The sky was foreign. He had no shoes, no phone, no weapons. His sacred gear sat quiet on his arm, not dormant exactly, but restrained, like a dog that had picked up a strange scent and was waiting to see if it turned dangerous. Think, Issei, he muttered. Think. He had died before. He knew what death felt like, the cold drop of it, the way sensations simply withdrew like a tide going out. This was not that. His heart was beating. His lungs were working. He was cold and confused and his feet hurt on the sand, but he was undeniably, stubbornly, inconveniently alive. He had been transported then? Or reincarnated? Or something in between? The thought settled in his chest with surprising calm. He had spent the last 2 years of his life learning that the universe was more complicated and crowded than most people realized, that devils and angels and fallen angels and dragons were real and had feelings and ambitions and occasionally ate his cooking. After all that, waking up on a strange beach under wrong stars was unusual but not unmanageable. He needed to find people. He needed information. He needed shoes. He turned and walked toward the treeline. The forest beyond the beach was dense but navigable, the undergrowth thin enough that he could push through without too much difficulty. A faint path, barely more than a suggestion trampled into the earth, wound between the larger trees. He followed it for perhaps 20 minutes before he heard voices. He stopped instantly, pressing himself against the trunk of a tree. Old instincts, newer instincts, all of them agreed. Unknown voices in unknown territory meant stillness and observation first. The voices were female. 2 of them, speaking in a language he understood perfectly, though he could not immediately say why, given that the words had a cadence and certain technical vocabulary that felt distinctly out of place. They were arguing. Mildly, the way people who respect each other argue when they are tired. "I am telling you the radar contact was real," said the first voice, crisply professional, slightly impatient. "And I am telling you the radar contact was drift debris from the last engagement," said the second, calmer and lower. "Commander Harem ran a full past 2 hours ago, and found nothing. Drift debris does not have a heat signature." A pause. Then, grudgingly, "Fine. We look. But if it is debris, I want you to write the incident report." Happily, the sound of footsteps approaching on the path. Quick, practiced footsteps, with a particular crunch of authority. Issei judged distances, judged his options, and stepped out from behind the tree with his hands open and raised. The two figures who came around the bend in the path stopped dead. They were both young women, which his brain registered and then firmly set aside because there were more important details. The first was tall and silver-haired, wearing what appeared to be a naval officer's coat over an outfit that seemed designed for both function and a very specific aesthetic, with rigging on her back that looked like the scaled-down framework of a warship's superstructure, folded flat for transit through the trees. Her eyes, sharp and gray, fixed on him with an expression that was not quite alarm but was definitely not complacency either. The second was shorter, dark-haired, with fox-like eyes the color of amber, and an expression of immediate calculation. Her own rigging was smaller, quicker-looking, and her hand had gone to a weapon at her hip before he had finished stepping out of the tree-line. "My name is Issei Reborn," he said clearly, keeping his hands up and his voice steady. "I don't know where I am. I woke up on the beach about half an hour ago. I don't have any weapons. I am not a threat." Silence. The silver-haired one studied him with that sharp gaze, moving from his face to his clothes to his hands to his face again, evaluating. The dark-haired one's hand stayed on her weapon but did not draw it. "Your uniform," said the silver-haired one finally. "That is a Japanese student's school uniform." "Yes. You are not military." "No. You came from the sea." "I came from the beach. I don't remember crossing the sea. I don't remember much of anything right before I woke up." He paused. "I know that sounds strange. Everything about this situation is strange," said the dark-haired one, and she finally, slowly, moved her hand away from her weapon. "My name is Kaga. This is Enterprise." The silver-haired one, Enterprise, gave him a look that was measuring in a different way now. "You said Issei Reborn?" "Yes. Come with us," she said. The base was larger than the forest suggested it would be. A wide harbor opened up beyond the trees, calm water full of ships, and on the land around it clustered an assortment of buildings that ranged from what looked like prefabricated military housing to structures that had clearly been built with more permanence in mind. Lights were beginning to come on as dawn approached, and figures moved between the buildings, most of them female, most of them wearing some variation of the same naval aesthetic as Enterprise and Kaga. Issei walked between the two women, keeping his hands visible, looking around at everything without trying to look like he was looking around at everything. The rigging these women wore, he was starting to understand, was not decorative. It was functional. 2 or 3 of the figures he passed had their rigging deployed in a way that suggested they were just returning from a patrol on the water, moving with the easy rolling gait of people accustomed to traveling the surface of the sea. "Ship girls." The phrase surfaced from somewhere in his memory, uncertain in origin, and his sacred gear pulsed once against his arm in what felt almost like confirmation. "This is the naval base," Enterprise told him as they walked, her voice professional and even. "It is the primary command hub for the Eagle Union and Royal Navy's joint operation in this sector. Our commander is currently unavailable." "What sector?" he asked. She glanced at him sidelong. "The ocean." "I know, but which part of the ocean? I mean, which country, which—" "That," said Kaga quietly, "is more complicated than it sounds." He stopped walking. They stopped a beat later and turned to look at him. "How complicated?" he asked. Enterprise and Kaga exchanged a look. It was the kind of look that contained an entire conversation compressed into approximately a second and a half. Then Enterprise said, with the careful precision of someone choosing each word individually, "You are not from this world." Issei breathed in. Breathe out. That is what I suspected, he said. Okay. How bad is that? Unknown, said Enterprise. But you are alive and uninjured and you appear to be human, which means the situation is at least manageable. She paused. Our commander left detailed standing orders for situations we cannot immediately categorize. You fall into that category. We will house you, feed you, and brief you as fully as we can while we determine next steps. That's actually a very reasonable response, Issei said, somewhat surprised. The ghost of something crossed Enterprise's face. Not quite a smile, but something that had considered the possibility. We deal with a great deal that is unreasonable, she said. We have learned to be organized about it. They gave him a room in the officers' quarters, small and clean and smelling of wood polish and salt. They gave him clothes, a set of plain civilian items that were clearly from a supply room, fitting well enough. They gave him breakfast, rice and grilled fish and miso soup, and he ate with the quiet intensity of someone whose body had decided that having opinions about the situation could wait until after it was no longer hungry. Kaga sat across from him at the table in the small mess hall and watched him eat with an expression of carefully neutral evaluation. You're not alarmed, she observed. I'm very alarmed, he said. I'm just also very hungry. Fair. He finished the soup and set down the bowl. Can you tell me what is going on? Not just here specifically. Generally. What this world is. What you are. What those rigging things mean. He paused. I have experience with things that are hard to explain. You won't shock me. Kaga studied him for a long moment. Her amber eyes were unreadable in the way that suggested she was reading him quite thoroughly. Then she settled back in her chair, folded her hands, and began to explain. She explained the sirens. She explained the Red Axis. She explained the nature of the ship girls, how they existed at the intersection of weapon and person, constructed souls drawn from the spirits of great warships given form and will and independent thought. She explained the factions, the Eagle Union and the Royal Navy and the Sakura Empire, and the others. She explained the nature of warfare in this world, the battles fought on the open sea between girls who could call forth the firepower of entire warships. He listened without interrupting. He had learned, over 2 years of being surprised by the supernatural, that interrupting the explanation usually meant you missed the important part. When she finished, there was a short silence. And your commander, he said? What happened to your commander? Something shifted in Kaga's expression. Barely perceptible, the tightening around the eyes that meant the question touched something that was not entirely comfortable. He was injured in the last major engagement, she said. He is recovering. He will return. But in the meantime someone needs to be in charge. Yes. And right now that someone is. A committee, said Enterprise from the doorway, where she had apparently arrived without either of them noticing her. Which is approximately as effective as it sounds. She crossed to the table and sat down. She had changed into a fresh uniform, slightly less formal than the officer's coat from the forest, and she looked slightly less like someone about to make a strategic decision, and slightly more like someone who had made all the strategic decisions available, and was now waiting for more options. We are managing, she said. But we are short a commander. We have been for 3 weeks. The sirens have been probing our defensive perimeter with increasing frequency. The girls are, she paused, choosing the word unsettled. They need someone to lead them, Issei said. They need someone to trust, Enterprise said. That is not quite the same thing. She looked at him steadily. You were someone, before you came here. You had a role. Responsibilities. I was a second-year high school student, he said. And the devil. And the bearer of one of the most powerful sacred gears in history. It's a long story. We have time, said Kaga. So he told them. He kept it brief and factual, the same way they had briefed him, trusting that they could evaluate what was relevant and set aside what was not. He told them about Rias Gremry and the Occult Research Club, about Drag and the boosted gear, about the world of heaven and the underworld and the politics between them. He told them about the fights, the raiding games, the Cows Brigade. He did not tell them about the last moment before the white light. Some things were too raw and too recent, and too his own to spread across a table in front of people he had known for less than 3 hours. When he finished, Enterprise and Kaga sat in silence for a moment. You have experience in command, Enterprise said finally. I had a team, he said carefully. I wouldn't call it command exactly. You protected people under your care. Yes. You made difficult decisions under pressure. Yes. You understand that the people you protect are not objects or subordinates but individuals with their own importance. He thought of Rias. Thought of Aquino. Thought of Kaneko, who was so small and so fierce. Thought of Yudo, who carried his grief with such quiet dignity. Yes, he said. I understand that. Enterprise and Kaga looked at each other again. That compressed conversation look. Then Enterprise turned back to him. We cannot force you, she said. We would not want to. But we are asking you formally if you would be willing to serve as acting commander of this base while our commander recovers. You would have full authority over operational decisions. You would have our support. She paused. The girls need someone to rally around. Someone who will see them as what they are. People, he said. People, she agreed. Not weapons. Not tools. People. Issei looked at his hands. His left hand, where the sacred gears sat invisible but present. His right hand, still faintly marked with the cold memory of the sea. He was lost. He was in a world that was not his own. He had no idea if he would ever find a way home, or what home would look like if he did. But there were people here who needed someone to show up for them. That, at least, was a thing he understood. Okay, he said. Tell me everything I need to know. Chapter 2, The Weight of a Commander's Coat. The coat was gray-blue, naval wool, with gold rank insignia on the shoulders that caught the morning light and threw it back in short warm flashes. It was a commander's coat, kept ready in a storage cabinet in the base's main office, cleaned and pressed for a return that kept being postponed. Issei held it, and did not immediately put it on. You do not have to wear it, Enterprise said from beside him. She was watching him with that measuring look she seemed to wear as her default expression, patient as stone but sharp as the edge of it. It is symbolic. The girls will know what it means. I know, he said. That's why I'm thinking about it. He understood symbolism. He had been a devil's knight, then a devil's bishop, then eventually something that existed in its own category because the existing categories had not quite fit. He had worn marking on him before, worn status, worn the weight of what other people expected from whoever carried a given title. He understood that putting on a coat was not just putting on a coat. He put it on. It fit reasonably well across the shoulders. Whoever the previous commander had been, they were built similarly, which felt like either a very mild cosmic coincidence, or the universe making a small effort toward competence. The morning assembly is in 20 minutes, Enterprise told him. The girls will be gathered on the main parade ground. You should introduce yourself. What do I say? The truth. They will know if you lie. Several of them have been in service long enough to develop fairly accurate intuitions about people. A pause. Also, Ortega will almost certainly ask you something embarrassing within the first 5 minutes, so be prepared for that. Embarrassing how? She is enthusiastic, Enterprise said, and the delicacy with which she chose that word suggested it was doing heavy lifting. She means well. The parade ground was a wide flat space between the harbor and the main buildings, paved in clean gray stone that had been worn smooth by years of drills and formations. They were already assembled when Issei walked out with Enterprise at his side and Kaga 2 steps behind, the rows of them standing in neat order, dozens of young women in naval uniforms of varying designs, rigging folded or deployed depending on individual habit and current duty status. They went quiet when he appeared. The silence had texture. It was not hostile exactly, but it was evaluating, a collective assessment happening simultaneously across every face in those rows. He had stood in front of hostile audiences before. Devils who thought a human had no business being in a rating game. Fallen angels who had come to collect what they felt they were owed. His own sacred gear, in the early days, which had sometimes felt like an entity with a separate agenda. He walked to the center of the ground, turned to face them, and let them look at him. My name is Issei Hayaru, he said. His voice came out steady, which was good because he was only about 70% confident his legs would remain steady if tested. I'm not from this world. I'm going to be honest about that from the start because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve a performance. He paused. I arrived here 36 hours ago with no shoes and very little idea of what was going on. I have been briefed. I still have a lot to learn. A murmur moved through the assembly. Not hostile, he thought. Curious. I know you're used to someone else standing in front of you, he continued. I'm not here to replace that person. I'm here to hold the space until they can come back. What I can promise you is this. I will do my best to understand each of you. I will not treat you as tools. I will not make decisions about you without hearing from you. And I will stand between you and whatever the sirens throw at us with everything I have. Another pause. He scanned the rows, meeting eyes where he could. Some faces were skeptical. A few were openly curious. One tall girl near the front, honey blonde and radiantly beautiful in a way that seemed slightly theatrical, was watching him with a smile that suggested she had already made her assessment, and was pleased with the result. That was probably a Tego, he thought. I know that's a lot to take on faith from someone you just met, he said. So I'm not asking for trust yet. Trust is earned. I'm just asking for a chance to earn it. He straightened. Dismissed. The assembly broke formation in orderly stages. Most of them dispersed to their duties without comment. But several were moving in his direction, and Enterprise, appearing at his elbow with impeccable timing, said quietly, Brace. Atego was first, and she was exactly what her file had suggested, exuberant, warm, and possessed of a social gravity that pulled people toward her like a tide. She had Takao in tow, her sister, quieter and more measured, whose dark eyes were doing the same work that Enterprises always did, cataloging and evaluating. Commander, Atego said, and her voice was genuinely warm rather than performatively so, which reframed her entire first impression. Welcome to our base. Formally. I know you've already been told the important things, but I wanted to say it myself. She smiled, wide and unguarded. We're glad you're here. Thank you, he said, and meant it. I'm Takao, said the quieter one. Atego's sister. I have questions when you have time. Operational questions, not personal ones. Give me the afternoon, and I'll have reviewed the current operational status well enough to have a conversation. Takao gave him a small, precise nod that felt like the highest form of approval she was currently prepared to offer. Then there was Belfast, who arrived with the composure of someone who had been professionally composed for decades and whose first question was about his tea preference, which he correctly identified as a test of how he responded to care offered in the form of practical service. He answered honestly, green tea if available, and she gave him a look that suggested he had passed, though she kept her expression impeccable throughout. And then there was a voice from somewhere just past Belfast's shoulder, young and slightly too direct to be entirely comfortable. Are you actually going to fight, or are you just going to do paperwork like the last 2 weeks? Belfast stepped aside with the precise micro-movement of someone distancing themselves from a comment they found unfortunate, but not entirely wrong. The speaker was small. Not short exactly, but compact, with silver-white hair cut short and sharp and amber eyes that were looking up at him with an expression of aggressive honesty that he recognized immediately because he had seen it in the mirror during his first weeks trying to fit into Rias's peerage. I fight, he said simply. Always have. Show me the front line and I'll be on it. The silver-haired girl studied him for a 3-second beat. Then she said Ayanami, and walked away. That was approval, Enterprise told him quietly. From her, that was considerable approval. The office they gave him was large by necessity rather than luxury, the kind of space designed to hold maps and deployment plans, and the accumulated weight of operational decisions. It had a wide desk and 2 long tables covered in charts, and a window that looked out over the harbor. The harbor was, at that particular moment, catching the light in a way that turned the water gold and copper, and the ships moving through it were casting long shadows that crossed and recrossed in patient geometric rhythms. He stood at the window for a moment after Enterprise left him alone for the first time and just breathed. He was the acting commander of a naval base in another dimension. He had given a speech to several dozen ship girls an hour ago. He was wearing a borrowed coat and someone else's rank insignia, and he had no idea what he was doing. This was fine. This was fine. He had survived worse starting positions. He turned to the desk and began to read. Belfast arrived at precisely 3 in the afternoon with a tray, tea, a small plate of shortbread, and a summary document she had apparently prepared independently that gave a clear organizational breakdown of the base's current active roster, duty schedule, and known siren activity in the surrounding area. It was the most useful thing anyone had handed him since he arrived, and he told her so. "You anticipated my needs," he said, genuinely impressed. "It is my job to anticipate," she said. "And your job to act on what I provide. We will work well together, Commander, I think." She set the tray down with the precision of someone for whom imprecision was not an option. "Your first staff meeting is tomorrow morning at 7. The senior fleet girls will attend. I have added their profiles to the folder on the right side of your desk. You've been busy. The base requires someone to hold things together," she said simply. "I was holding what I could." He heard it clearly, the quiet, maintained competence of someone who had been waiting for someone else to arrive so they could finally set down what they had been holding. He made a mental note to thank her properly, once he knew her well enough to know how she preferred to be thanked. "Belfast," he said as she moved toward the door. She paused. "Commander, I know you've been carrying a lot. Thank you for not dropping it." She turned just enough to give him a look that was precise and contained and warmer than her expression usually permitted. "Do not give me reason to drop it now," she said. It was a challenge and an expression of confidence simultaneously. "I won't," he said. She left. He drank his tea, which was excellent, and went back to reading. He worked through the night mostly. Old habit. Rios's club had operated on nocturnal hours more often than not, and his body had long since recalibrated its understanding of when rest was appropriate. Around 2 in the morning he stepped out onto the walkway above the harbor to get fresh air and found Kaga standing at the railing, looking out at the water. She did not appear startled by his approach, which either meant she had heard him, or had some form of awareness that his sacred gear confirmed when it gave a quiet pulse, not alarmed, just noting. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "I rarely sleep before a change," she said. "Your arrival is a change." He leaned against the railing beside her, not quite adjacent but companionably close, looking at the same water she was looking at. The night sky was clear. Those wrong stars were out, brighter now, and he was starting to learn their shapes the way he had once learned the shapes of the constellations above Japan. "You seemed sure about asking me to take the role," he said. "You and Enterprise both. You just met me. We have both been in enough situations to know quickly," Kaga said. "You did not lie. You did not perform. When Enterprise told you the girls needed to be seen as people and not tools, you understood immediately what she meant. Not theoretically. Viscerally." She paused. "You have been seen as a tool yourself." He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," he said. "Not by the people who mattered. Then you know what it costs when it happens. And you know the difference it makes when it doesn't." "Yes." The water moved below them. A light breeze pushed across the harbor, carrying the smell of salt and something faintly mechanical, the warm metalando smell of ships. "What are the sirens really?" he asked. "Unknown," Kaga said. "Enemy. Destructive. They move with purpose, but we have never been able to determine what the purpose is ultimately aimed at. They do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They advance and they attack, and where they go they leave ruin." She paused. "That is what makes them frightening. Not their power. Their incomprehensibility." "I've fought things like that," he said. "The Cows Brigade you mentioned. Them, and others. Things that wanted to unmake the world for reasons that translated into human understanding only as hunger." He turned the word over. "Incomprehensibility is terrifying. But it doesn't make them invincible. Every enemy has patterns. We just have to find them." Kaga was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Ayanami likes you." He blinked at the apparent change of subject. She walked away after saying one word. "Yes." She does that when she is satisfied. If she was not satisfied, she would have kept asking questions until she was. A very faint shift of expression, something that might have been amusement in a different lighting. "She is difficult to satisfy. I appreciate people who ask questions until they get real answers," he said. "Easy to satisfy means easy to mislead." "Yes," said Kaga, and looked at him for the first time in the conversation with something that felt like a reassessment, slight and significant simultaneously. It does. They stood in silence for a while longer, looking at the harbor. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that does not need to be filled, that two people can inhabit together without either of them losing anything. When he finally said goodnight and went back inside, the stars were beginning to pale at the horizon's edge, and the ocean was turning from black to the deep blue-gray that came just before dawn. Chapter 3: The First Meeting, and the Tea That Followed. The staff meeting at 7 in the morning was, by general consensus, the first sign that the new commander was going to be different. Every commander who had preceded him had held staff meetings as operational briefings, direct and efficient, the exchange of data and directives. Necessary. Professional. Effective. The new commander walked into the meeting room, looked at the 7 senior fleet girls seated around the table, and said, "Before we go through the operational data, I want to know how each of you is doing. Not professionally. As a person." There was a silence that lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then Belfast, from her seat to his right, said smoothly, "I believe everyone is well, Commander," and the silence broke into the kind of careful professional courtesy that was not quite the response he had asked for but was the safest version of it. "I'll ask more specifically, then," he said, settling into his chair with the easy calm of someone who had decided he was not going to find this silence uncomfortable. He looked around the table. "Enterprise. How are you doing?" Enterprise, who had been preparing to give a tactical overview, paused. She met his eyes. Something in her expression ran a quick internal calculation and then, apparently, decided on honesty. "Tired," she said. "Functionally capable. The last 3 weeks have been a long exercise in holding a line without being sure the line would hold." "Thank you," he said. "I'm going to make sure you get rest this week. Real rest, not standby rest." He moved his gaze. "Atego." "I'm wonderful," Atego said, and smiled, and then paused and added, "I am a little worried. About the newer girls. Some of them have not been through a major engagement before, and the siren activity has been very close lately. I'll want to talk to you about the newer arrivals this afternoon," he said. "Your knowledge of the roster is better than mine at this point." Atego's smile became something slightly different. Warmer and less performed. "Of course," she said, and so it went. Takao gave him a precise, organized accounting of her concerns about supply logistics. Kaga mentioned the patrol schedules needed review. A girl named Cleveland, eagle insignia on her coat and an irreverent brightness in her eyes, told him without being asked that morale had been declining and that she thought a joint training exercise would help. A quiet girl named Shikaka said very little but watched him with large, serious eyes that he recognized as the eyes of someone who would not believe words and was waiting to see if actions followed. He took notes. He asked follow-up questions. He did not pretend to have answers he did not have, and he did not dismiss concerns that seemed minor because minor concerns left unaddressed had a habit of becoming significant ones. It took 40 minutes before they got to the operational briefing, which was 20 minutes longer than any previous staff meeting had spent on anything other than operational content. But when they left, the atmosphere in the room was different from when they had arrived, and Enterprise, lingering at the door as the others filed out, said that was effective. "It was genuine," he said. "Yes," she said. "That is why it was effective." The rest of the morning he spent in motion, which felt more natural than sitting behind the desk. He did not announce that he was coming. He simply appeared in different parts of the base, the docks, the maintenance areas, the training grounds, and wherever he appeared he stopped and talked to whoever was there. Some of them were awkward about it. They were not used to the commander appearing outside of formal contexts. A few of them answered in clipped, military-correct syllables and kept their eyes forward, which he respected. But most of them, given half a minute of actual human attention, relaxed in some degree. A pair of smaller girls near the East Dock, whom he later learned were Javelin and Laffy, were arguing in half-whispers about something to do with maintenance schedules when he came around the corner. They went immediately still. Laffy, shorter and pink-haired and wearing an expression of absolute serenity that he identified as either extreme calm or strategic blankness, said "Hello, Commander," in a voice like a held breath. "Hi," he said. "What are you arguing about?" Javelin, who had the direct energy of someone who had not yet learned to manage her own forthright tendencies, said, "The maintenance rotation is unfair and Laffy has been pulling extra shifts, and she won't complain about it." Laffy looked at him with that placid expression. "It's fine," she said. "Extra shifts are fine if they're voluntary," he said, "and not so fine if they're just happening because the schedule has a gap." "Which is it?" A pause. Then Laffy said quietly, "Gap? I'll look at the rotation," he said. "Today. Come find me after dinner if I haven't sent you an updated schedule by then." He paused. "You shouldn't have to absorb the gap yourself, and not say anything. If something is unfair, say it." Laffy looked at him for a moment with those calm eyes, and then something shifted in her face, very small, like a window opening a crack to let in air. "Okay," she said. Javelin, beside her, made a small sound of vindicated satisfaction. By midday he had covered most of the base, and his boots were dusty, and he had filled 6 pages of notes, and his brain was processing the names and faces and concerns at a rate that was genuinely impressive given that he had met none of them before approximately 40 hours ago. He was standing in the commissary eating a bowl of rice and reviewing his notes, when a shadow fell across the table, and he looked up to find Ayanami standing on the other side, holding her own lunch tray and watching him with those flat amber eyes. "You can sit down," he said. She sat. She ate with neat, economical motions. He went back to his notes. After a few minutes she said, without particular preamble, "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Talk to everyone individually. Commanders don't usually do that." "I'm not a usual commander," he said. "Also, the most useful information is the kind people don't think to include in reports. The only way to get it is to ask them directly." He looked up. "Why? Does it bother you?" A pause. "No," she said. "I was curious. I spent 2 years as part of a team where the leader made sure every person felt seen," he said. "It made the team better. It made us want to work harder and fight better because we weren't just fighting for an objective, we were fighting for each other." He shrugged. It seemed worth trying. Ayanami was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your team? Where are they now?" The question landed gently, the way small sharp things sometimes do. He took a breath. "Another world," he said. "I don't know if I can get back. I don't know if they're okay." A pause. "But they're strong. They'll be fine." She looked at him steadily. "You're sad about it," she said. Not an accusation. Just an observation, delivered with the directness of someone who found it wasteful to pretend obvious things were not obvious. "Yeah," he said. "I am. But you're still doing the work. Being sad doesn't mean you stop. It just means it costs a little more." He met her eyes. "You know how that works, I think." Ayanami looked at him for a long, unblinking moment. Then she picked up her chopsticks and went back to her food. After another minute she said, very quietly, "Shimike's wanted me to tell you she thinks you're interesting, but she didn't want to say it herself." He blinked. "Okay. Tell her thank you. She'll probably zoom past you at some point and shout it," Ayanami said, with the flatness of someone reporting a weather forecast. "I thought you should be prepared." The afternoon brought the promised conversation with Atego, who arrived at his office with Takao and a briefing portfolio that had clearly been assembled with considerable care. They sat across from him and Atego talked, fluently and warmly, about the newer arrivals at the base, girls who had manifested recently, and were still finding their footing. She had names and personalities and specific concerns for each one, organized not alphabetically or by ship class but by what she had assessed each girl most needed. "Hammond worries about being useful," Atego said. "She works twice as hard as she needs to because she's afraid of being a burden. Mitsuki is homesick, though she won't say what home means to her exactly. Aoba keeps asking questions about everything, every battle, every mission, every procedure, and she needs someone to tell her that curiosity is an asset, not an interruption." He wrote it down. "All of it." Atego watched him write with an expression that was trying to stay professional and not quite managing it, the corners of her mouth lifting in a way she seemed to be working to suppress. "What?" he asked, not looking up. "Nothing. Just. You actually wrote it down." "Of course I wrote it down. I'm going to talk to all of them." When the previous commander Atego stopped. Started again. The previous commander was good. Really good. But he read reports. He didn't come to the docks. People write different things in reports than they say face to face, Issei said. Both are useful. You need both. Takao, who had been listening with her characteristic quiet attention, said, Where did you learn command? I learned it from watching someone do it well, he said. And from watching someone do it badly. Both teach you things, just different things. He set down his pen. Also from being on the other side of it. From being the person who needed someone to show up. Takao absorbed this. And someone did show up for you, she said. Yes. When it mattered. There was a brief quiet, and then Atego said softly, We're glad you showed up here. And it was so genuinely meant, stripped of her usual warm-fast performance, just the bare real thing, that he had to look back at his notes for a moment to give himself somewhere to put his eyes. Me too, he said. I think. Atego laughed, quick and bright, and Takao pressed her lips together in what he was starting to recognize as her equivalent of a smile. Evening came. The base settled into the specific rhythm of a military installation approaching nighttime, duties handed off, lights changing, the sound of activity tapering toward the quieter registers of maintenance, and watch and personal time. He was still in the office, working through the updated maintenance rotation he had promised Laffy, when there was a quiet knock at the door. Come in. Belfast entered, and behind her, looking slightly like she would prefer not to be in an office but was committed to the mission, was Laffy. I told her you said to come if the schedule wasn't updated, Belfast said, with the tone of someone who had been recruited as an escort for reasons she found both faintly amusing and entirely appropriate. Perfect timing, he said, and slid the updated rotation across the desk. 3 fewer shifts per week for Laffy, redistributed across the rotation fairly. The gap was actually caused by a scheduling overlap that was easy to fix once I found it. Laffy looked at the sheet for a moment. Then she looked at him. You actually fixed it, she said, with the slightly stunned air of someone who had prepared for the possibility of disappointment, and was now recalibrating. I said I would. She looked at the sheet again. Then she said, very simply, Thank you, Commander, and the way she said it, the small realness of it, made it weigh considerably more than its 3 words. Thank you for telling me there was a problem, he said. That's actually the harder part. Laffy considered this. Then she nodded, once, precisely, and left. Belfast lingered a moment at the door. You've had a productive day, she said. Productive and exhausting, he agreed. Is there anything else that needs handling tonight? Nothing that cannot wait until tomorrow. The evening patrol reported clear. The siren activity has been quiet since mid-afternoon. She paused. You should sleep, Commander. I will. He looked up at her. Belfast. When you said earlier that the base needed someone to hold things together. How long have you been the one doing that? A very small, very controlled expression. Longer than I will put in a report, she said. From tomorrow, you don't have to do it alone. That's not a courtesy. That's an operational necessity. You're too valuable to exhaust. The expression shifted, just slightly, from controlled to something a shade warmer. I appreciate that, she said, and her voice was precise and clean and carried its feeling in the spaces between the words rather than in the words themselves. Good night, Commander. Good night, Belfast. The harbor was quiet when he finally stepped outside. The stars were out in their foreign patterns and the water was dark and still and reflected them back distorted but present. He sat on the edge of the dock and looked at the water for a while. Somewhere far away, in another world that might as well be another universe, Rias Gremery was probably going to bed, or fighting, or doing paperwork in her clubroom. Aquino was probably laughing at something. Kaneko was probably sitting in silence being quietly extraordinary. Yuto was probably thinking about someone he had not stopped thinking about since the day they died. He missed them with a sharpness that sat in his chest like a held breath. But here, on this dock, on this base, under these wrong stars, there were people who needed someone. And he was, by some combination of fate and coincidence, and the universe's occasionally inexplicable sense of what was needed where, the person who had shown up. He had always believed that was enough. That showing up was enough to start. He was going to find out if he had been right. Chapter 4, Red on the Water. The siren attack came at dawn on the 4th day. He was awake when the alarm sounded, which was either luck or the consequence of having slept badly in the specific way you sleep badly when some part of your brain has decided that the quiet is suspicious. He was at the operations room in 4 minutes, coat on and notes already in hand, and Enterprise was there ahead of him, which he was not surprised by, standing over the tactical display with the calm of someone who had been born expecting this moment. 3 separate incursion vectors, she said, without preamble, her finger tracing lines on the display. Northeast, east, and southeast. The northeast and southeast are secondary. The eastern approach is the main thrust. They are pushing directly toward the harbor. He looked at the display. The red markers were moving in a pattern he had been studying, in the operational histories he had read since his first night. Not random. Organized. Pushing toward the choke point that, if breached, would put the harbor open. They want a split, he said. The flanking approaches are designed to draw defensive response so the center can push through. Yes, said Enterprise. So we don't split evenly. We weight the center. The flanks get enough to hold and slow, but not enough to decisively engage, while the main force hits the eastern approach hard and fast. He paused. Can you lead the eastern defense? Yes. Take Kaga and the 1st Carrier Division. Atago and Takao on the center-right. I want Cleveland and her division on rapid response, positioned to reinforce wherever breaks first. He looked up. Where's Ayanami? Already at the east dock, said Belfast from the doorway, her voice exactly as composed as it always was, which at this moment was the most reassuring thing in the room. She anticipated the call. Of course she did. Tell her she's on point for the northeast approach. She knows those waters better than anyone in that division. Understood. And Belfast. I need a status feed from every division every 5 minutes once engagement begins. Continuous. If I can't see the whole picture, I can't make decisions that don't cost us. Already prepared. She held up a communications device. You will hear from me before you need to ask. He looked at the room, at the controlled motion of the operations staff, at the display with its moving markers, at Enterprise standing ready with the steady competence of someone who was, in some form or another, a warship. Let's go, he said. He could not fight the battle from the water the way they could. He did not have rigging, did not have the ship soul that let them run across the sea's surface and call down firepower. He was a human being with a sacred gear and a borrowed coat, and his place was the operations room. He stayed there. He stayed there, and he watched the display and he listened to the reports, and he made decisions. At 6 minutes into the engagement, the northeast approach pushed harder than expected, and he rerouted half of Cleveland's rapid response in that direction before Ayanami's division was overrun. At 11 minutes, the southeast approach tried to pivot toward the harbor mouth, which he had anticipated, and the second reserve he had kept back, a small but precise group under Hammond's nervous but determined command, hit the pivot before it could complete. At 19 minutes, Enterprise broke the eastern thrust. He heard it on the communication feed, the sharp percussion of heavy engagement, then a change in the pattern of sounds, the enemy's rhythm breaking, and then Enterprise's voice, even and factual, eastern approach neutralized. Recommending pursuit interdiction to prevent reformation. Approved, he said. Take Kaga and go. Cleveland, collapse inward and support the flanks to clean up. Copy, Cleveland said, and he could hear in her voice the tight bright thing that was good soldiers in the moment after a line holds. The last siren incursion was neutralized at 31 minutes. The harbor was undamaged. No casualties. He let himself exhale. They came back in stages, the divisions returning to harbor in order of engagement completion. He was on the dock when they came in, coat still on, standing where they could see him. Not to perform, not to be seen as performing, but because they had gone out on his orders and he wanted to be the first thing they saw when they came back. He wanted them to know he had watched. That he had been present for the whole thing even from the land. Enterprise docked last, which was not surprising. She had been furthest out, and had stopped to ensure the interdiction was complete before returning. She walked up the dock toward him with the slightly less-limbed ease of someone who had spent all their tension in the fight, and come out the other side into a state of very pure calm. She stopped in front of him. 31 minutes, she said. Minimal damage. No casualties. Good work, he said. All of you. She studied him for a moment with those gray eyes. The rerouting at 6 minutes, she said. That was the decision that mattered. If you'd waited another 2 minutes, Ayanami's division would have been in a worse position. I had a good feed, he said. Belfast made sure I could see everything. You made use of what you could see, Enterprise said. That is not nothing. He met her eyes. You trusted me to make the calls. You made the right calls. I got lucky on the timing. Luck prepared by judgment, she said, with the particular inflection of someone who had heard that argument before and knew exactly where it led. Do not dismiss your own competence. I do not. He looked at her for a moment. She looked back, patient and level and precise. Thank you, he said. She gave him the small, almost note smile that he was beginning to recognize as her high commendation. We should debrief, she said. But first you should eat something. You have been on duty since before the alarm. So have you. I am a warship, she said, simply and without drama. You are a person. The requirements are different. He opened his mouth to argue and then looked at her expression and closed it again. Fine, he said. Breakfast. Then debrief. Good, she said, and turned toward the mess hall, and after a moment he followed. Hammond found him afterward, when the debrief was done and the base had settled back into its working rhythm. She was standing near the maintenance area with the expression of someone who had approached and retreated twice already and was on her third attempt. Commander, she said. Hammond. Good work this morning. She blinked. I thank you. I wanted to ask. The rear reserve deployment. Was that because you thought we could handle it, or was it because there wasn't anyone else? He looked at her. Atago's briefing came back. Hammond worries about being useful. Because I thought you could handle it, he said clearly. I had other options. I chose you because the pivot defense needed speed and precision, and your division's training record showed you could move fast and execute clean. Which you did. She was quiet for a moment. You actually looked at the training records? I look at everything, he said. I wouldn't send someone into a position I wasn't confident they could hold. That's not how I work. Another pause. Then, quietly, okay. Come to me if you have questions. Before a mission, after a mission, whenever. My door is open. She nodded, and some of the tension in her shoulders settled by a fraction. Yes, Commander. She left. He looked after her for a moment, thinking about how many people walked around carrying the weight of wondering if they were enough, wondering if they were seen, and how much could be shifted just by someone taking 15 seconds to be explicit about what they valued. He had learned that from Rias. She had been extraordinarily good at it. He owed her a debt he was never going to be able to repay. He could at least put it to use. Chapter 5, What the Stars Don't Know. A week passed, and then another, and Issei Reborn began to understand the shape of his days. Morning, operational briefing, status reports, adjustments to patrol schedules based on the previous day's intel. He ate breakfast in the mess hall with whoever was there rather than alone in the office, which had started as an efficiency measure and had become something more like ritual. Midday, the working part of command, the decisions and communications and the visits to different parts of the base that kept him informed in the ways that reports could not. Evening, debrief, review, preparation for the following day. And then, usually, a stretch of time that was technically personal time and that he used partly for personal things and partly, quietly, for sitting with the feelings he had not yet figured out what to do with. He was adjusting. That was the most honest way to put it. Adjusting to the wrong stars and the salt air and the weight of the commander's coat. Adjusting to the faces that were becoming familiar, to the rhythms of the base, to the specific kind of responsibility that came with being the person people looked toward when they needed direction. He was also, he admitted to himself in the small honest hours around midnight, terribly homesick. He talked to Kaga about it, because Kaga was the person who noticed when something was present in a silence, and did not pretend she had not noticed. They were sitting on the dock again, which had become a recurring location for the conversations that were too large or too quiet for the office. The night was clear and the water was still and the stars were out in their foreign constellations. Tell me about them, Kaga said. If you want to. So he did. He told her about Rias and the way she led with her whole self, generous and fierce and occasionally terrifying. He told her about Akino's laughter and the complexity that lived underneath it. He told her about Kaniko's uncompromising honesty and the tenderness she hid behind it. He told her about Yuto's quiet honor and his grief and the way he carried both with exactly the same dignity. He told her about Irina, who believed in everything bright. About Gasper, who was afraid of almost everything and kept showing up anyway. About Asia, whose kindness was so undefended that it was sometimes like standing in front of an open window. He talked for a long time. Kaga listened, which she did well, without filling the gaps or redirecting or trying to offer solutions. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You love them very much, she said. They're my family, he said. They're the first family I chose. Then they are well chosen. She paused. I understand that kind of love. The kind you build from nothing with people you were thrown together with by circumstances that seemed like they should not have produced anything good. The Eagle Union. The Royal Navy. We are not naturally the same. We should not work together. But we do, because we chose to, because the people who came before us chose to. Is it enough? He asked. Choosing? Or does it always cost something? It always costs something, she said. The question is whether what it builds is worth the cost. He looked at the water. Worth it, he said. Both times. She made a sound that was somewhere between acknowledgement and agreement. They sat in silence. After a while she said, You are doing well here, Issei. She had used his name. First name, without title. He was not sure when that had happened, exactly, but it felt right in the way that small things do when they have been true for a while before they are said. I'm doing my best, he said. That is what I mean, she said. The morning he met Suikaku was memorable for several reasons, the most immediate of which was that she started the conversation by telling him he was doing it wrong. The tactical exercise this morning, she said, planting herself in front of his desk with the energy of someone who had been waiting to have this conversation and was not going to be deflected. The formation deployment you ordered for the 2nd Division was textbook, but the sea conditions this morning would have made the left flank exposure worse than the sim assumes. It would have worked, but it would have worked less well than it could have. He looked at her. She was tall, greenied, with a braid and an expression of aggressive competence that reminded him uncomfortably of himself at approximately the same developmental stage, meaning the stage where you had just figured out that you were good at things and had not yet fully acquired the humility that came from discovering there were things you were not good at. Show me, he said. She blinked. What? Show me. Pull up the simulation, show me the sea conditions you're talking about, walk me through your alternative deployment. A pause. She had clearly prepared for resistance and found acceptance, which required rapid recalibration. She pulled up the simulation. She walked him through it. She was right, he saw immediately, about the sea conditions, and she was right about most of the alternative deployment, and she was wrong about one element that had a non-obvious interaction with a second variable she had not accounted for. He pointed this out. She stared at the display for approximately 4 seconds and then said, reluctantly, okay. Yeah. That changes the math. So we were both half right, he said. Which means if you'd been in the briefing room this morning we'd have gotten to a better answer faster. He looked at her. Are you? Am I what? In the briefing room. On the roster for staff meetings. No. I'm not senior enough. I'm adding you, he said. Not as a formality. I actually want you there. He paused. Provided you bring this energy. I don't want polite. I want correct. Suikaku stared at him with an expression of someone who was experiencing the specific disorientation of having complained about a problem, and found it solved before they finished speaking. Okay, she said. What's your name? He asked. I know your ship designation. I mean how you introduce yourself. Suikaku. Suikaku. I'm Issei. Welcome to the staff meetings. He picked up his pen. Was there anything else? Another pause. Then, slightly softer, no. That was it. Good. He went back to his notes. See you tomorrow morning at 7. She left. Through the window he watched her cross the parade ground with a different stride than she'd had going in, something in it that had not been there before, a quality that was slightly more settled, slightly more claimed. He had an idea she was going to be formidable. He found Shikaku in the records room, which was where she apparently spent much of her personal time, reading operational histories with the patient intensity of someone committed to understanding everything that had happened before she arrived. He did not interrupt her immediately. He found the section of records he was looking for, pulled a folder, and sat at the table a few spaces away and began to read. After 10 minutes she said, without looking up, "You're waiting for me to acknowledge you." "I'm reading," he said. A pause. "You're reading the third quarter operational reports from 14 months ago. I'm trying to understand the history of the base's engagement patterns. It helps me contextualize current deployments." Another pause longer. Then she set down her own folder and looked at him. Her eyes were large and very still, the kind of eyes that processed more than they revealed. "Enterprise said you read everything," she said. "Enterprise is accurate. You actually want to understand," she said, and there was something in the way she said it that made it clear this was a hypothesis she had been testing and had now reached a provisional conclusion on. "I make decisions that affect people," he said. "I want those decisions to be good ones. That requires understanding." She was quiet for a moment. Most commanders rely on their senior staff for understanding and reserve their personal attention for operations. Most commanders have been doing this their whole lives. I've been doing it for 10 days. I need to learn faster. A very small thing happened in her face. Not quite a smile, but the structural elements of one, the softening around the eyes. "The fourth quarter records," she said, "are more relevant." That was when the siren activity pattern shifted to the current configuration. He set down the third quarter folder and reached for the fourth quarter one. "Thank you." "You're welcome," she said, and went back to her own reading. They worked in companionable silence for another hour, two people reading about a base they both, for entirely different reasons, were trying to understand. At the end of the second week he wrote a letter he could not send. He did it anyway. He had learned from Yuto, who had written letters to people he would never see again for years before he arrived at Ko, that the act of writing had value independent of delivery. That saying things into the silence, even when no one was there to receive them, was a way of making them real enough to hold. He told Rias about Enterprise. He told Aquino about Kaga. He told Kaneko about Ayanami, which felt right in ways he could not entirely explain. He told Asia about Belfast, and he thought Asia would understand immediately, would recognize the particular form of care that lived in service and precision. He told Yuto about Shikaku, about the quiet intelligence that read everything and waited to speak until it had something real to say. He told them he was okay. That he was doing work that mattered. That he thought about them every day. He told them he was sorry he could not come home yet. He folded the letter and put it in the inside pocket of the commander's coat, close enough to feel, and went back to work. Act 2, Hearts Under Siege. A story of buried truths, quiet courage, and the things we carry into battle. Chapter 6, The Weight of Command. The morning briefings at Ironblood Anchorage ran 45 minutes exactly, unless Bismarck was in attendance, in which case they ran 60. Not because Bismarck was inefficient but because she was thorough, and thoroughness at her level of command had a weight to it that made everyone else in the room sit slightly more upright and speak slightly more precisely. Issei had learned this about Bismarck in the first 3 days of working alongside her. He had also learned that she noticed everything, forgot nothing, and that her silences were never empty. When Bismarck was quiet, she was thinking. When she was thinking, the smart move was to wait. "The patrol route adjustment you submitted last night," she said, setting his proposal on the table between them with a single careful motion. "Walk me through the reasoning." He did. He had anticipated the question and had the reasoning organized and ready, not because he wanted to impress her but because that was how he had learned to operate here, always one step prepared, always with the thought behind the decision available to explain. He talked through the sea condition projections, the siren activity data from the previous month, the way the original route created a predictable gap in the coverage that an intelligent enemy would eventually map and exploit. Bismarck listened without interrupting. Her gray eyes moved between his face and the map spread on the table, and when he finished she was silent for a moment in the way that meant she was examining what he had said from multiple angles before responding. "You have identified the same vulnerability our senior tactical staff flagged 3 months ago," she said. and then did not act on. May I ask why? Resource constraints. Rerouting the patrol increases fuel consumption by 11% per cycle, and we have been operating on restricted supply. He had not known about the supply constraint. He looked at the numbers again with that variable in mind and felt the particular sensation of a problem becoming more complicated in an interesting way. Is the constraint ongoing? It eases in approximately 3 weeks. The next supply convoy arrives. Then the route adjustment could be phased. Hold the current route for the constrained period, implement the change on convoy arrival, and use the interim time to preposition the affected units so the transition is seamless. He paused. That only works if the gap isn't exploited in the next 3 weeks, which is the same risk we're carrying currently. Correct. She studied him. You arrived at the same conclusion we reached 3 months ago, and you still haven't acted on it. No. He met her gaze directly. Which means there is a third factor I am not seeing yet. Something shifted in Bismarck's expression, barely visible but present. The patrol route passes through a corridor that is nominally neutral. Altering it requires notification to the Iron Blood command structure. Notification creates paperwork. Paperwork creates delay. In 3 months the supply situation resolves and the paperwork may also resolve and the problem solves itself without the friction of the institutional process. And if it doesn't solve itself, then we have learned something about the siren intelligence cycle, and we adjust. Issei was quiet for a moment. He was not sure he agreed with the calculus. He was also aware, with a clarity that had been growing steadily since he arrived, that he had been in this role for 3 weeks and Bismarck had been in hers for considerably longer. There was a difference between a correct analysis and a correct decision, and correct decisions required context he was still building. I'll table the proposal for now, he said. And revisit when the supply situation changes. Bismarck nodded. Then she said, You did not push back. I'm saving my pushback for things I understand completely. A pause. That is, she said, a more disciplined approach than I expected from someone your age. He thought about Rias, who had pushed back on things before she understood them, and about what it had cost her, and about what it had eventually built. I've had good teachers, he said. Belfast had taken it upon herself to ensure that the commander's quarters were, in her words, functional and appropriate. This had begun on his 3rd day as a straightforward organizational effort, and had evolved, by his 4th week, into something that Issei was increasingly certain had a different emotional dimension than pure professionalism. He noticed it in small things. The tea that arrived at his desk precisely when his focus was starting to fray. The way the paperwork was sorted not just alphabetically but with urgent items elevated and cross-referenced with his scheduled meetings. The fact that when he mentioned, once, that he had difficulty sleeping in unfamiliar spaces, the pillow arrangement in his quarters changed the following morning without any comment or acknowledgement from either of them. He was not oblivious. He had been genuinely oblivious for the first year at Co-Academy, and he had spent considerable energy since then trying to compensate for that developmental gap. He understood that there were people who expressed care through action rather than words, that service and attention could be a language as complete and specific as any spoken one, and that Belfast's particular form of that language was precise and sincere and not something to be taken for granted. He did not take it for granted. Belfast, he said one evening, when she set his last document of the day on the desk with the particular efficient motion that meant she considered his working day complete, and was politely signaling as much. Do you ever take time for yourself? Time that isn't about any of this. She paused. The question had surprised her, he could tell. My duties are a source of satisfaction, Commander. I do not experience them as a burden. That wasn't what I asked? A longer pause. She stood very still in the way that meant she was deciding how honest to be. He had learned that particular quality of her stillness. I read, she said finally. In the evenings, when the base is quiet. I find it restoring. What do you read? Another brief hesitation. Poetry primarily. Some fiction. Anything I should know about? He meant it lightly, genuinely curious, but something in her expression shifted before she composed it again. I would not presume to make recommendations without knowing your taste, she said, and the formality was back, which meant he had touched something she was not ready to discuss. He did not push. All right, he said. Good night, Belfast. Good night, Commander. She was at the door before he said thank you. For all of it. I know you know that, but I want to say it anyway. She did not turn around. But something in the line of her shoulders changed, a quality that was, if he was reading it correctly, close to being moved. It is my honor, she said, and left. He found Ayanami on the eastern pier at dusk, which was where she apparently came when she wanted to think without being disturbed. He had found her there twice before by accident, and once by design, and each time she had not asked him to leave. She was small and quiet in the way that still water is quiet, not empty but contained, with a depth that did not announce itself. He had learned, in the weeks since his arrival, that Ayanami observed more than she spoke, that her questions when she asked them were never careless, and that she had a particular quality of attention when she was listening that made the person being listened to feel genuinely heard. He sat down beside her on the pier, leaving a respectful distance, and looked at the water. You had a difficult day, she said, not as a question. The resupply negotiations took longer than I'd hoped. He leaned back on his hands. I kept wanting to just make a decision and move on, and I kept remembering that the decision affects other people's operations and I needed to understand the second-order effects before I committed. That sounds correct. It felt slow. Slow decisions made correctly produce better outcomes than fast decisions made incorrectly. He looked at her. Is that from something? A doctrine somewhere? She considered. No. It is something I worked out from observation. He smiled at that, genuinely, not the Commander Composure smile but the actual one. You observe a lot. It is useful. People tell you things without meaning to, when you pay attention. Their hesitations. What they look at when they are making a choice. What questions they ask and in what order. What have you observed about me? The question sat between them for a moment. He had not entirely meant to ask it, but it was out now, and he found he was actually curious about the answer. You look at the water when you are thinking, she said. Not at anything specific. Just the distance. And when someone says something true to you, something that you recognize, your face goes very still for a moment before you respond. That's, he started, then stopped. That's accurate. I know, she said simply. They sat in silence for a while. The lights of the base came on one by one along the shore, and the sky above darkened to the particular deep blue that preceded real dark. Ayanami, he said eventually. Are you all right here? Not your duties. You, personally. She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then, I did not expect to feel useful to someone who understood what I was saying, she said. I had prepared to be useful in other ways. It is different. Is different good? I believe so, she said. I am still deciding. He nodded. Take your time, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him then, a brief, direct look that was very different from her usual oblique attention, and then looked back at the water. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. Chapter 7, Calibrations. The thing about Suikako was that she had a temper, but her temper was honest, which Issei found significantly more workable than the kind that was strategic. She got frustrated, she said so, and then she worked the problem. It was a loop he recognized. The Eastern engagement sims, she said, dropping into the chair across from his desk with an energy that communicated urgency without quite crossing into alarm. I've run them 6 times in the last 2 days, and there is a recurring failure point in the third phase that I cannot optimize out. It keeps appearing in different formations under different conditions, which means it's not a formation problem. Shukako found him in the records room again, this time at 11 in the evening when most of the base was quiet. She did not appear surprised to find him there, which meant she had either looked for him elsewhere first, or she had simply known. You haven't eaten since midday, she said. He looked up from the logistics report he was cross-referencing. I lost track of time. There is rice in the mess hall. Someone left a portion of pickled vegetables as well. He set down the report. How do you know I haven't eaten? Belfast mentioned it. She was concerned but did not want to interrupt the resupply meeting. A pause. She also asked me to check on you because she felt I would be less intrusive than she would be. That was so precisely accurate to Belfast's reasoning that he almost laughed. She was probably right. She is usually right about that kind of thing. He stood, stretching, feeling the particular stiffness of having sat in a records room chair for 3 hours without moving. Do you want to walk to the mess hall with me, or were you just delivering the message? A brief pause. I will walk with you. The base was quiet at this hour, the kind of quiet that made the sound of their footsteps distinct against the stone path, the kind of quiet where the stars over the water were actually visible and not washed out by the lights of activity. He found he did not need to fill it with conversation, and apparently neither did she. In the mess hall he found the rice Belfast had apparently arranged to be kept warm, and the pickled vegetables, and he sat at the near table and ate, while Shikaka settled across from him with a cup of tea she produced from somewhere with the serenity of someone who had long ago made peace with late evenings. What were you reading? She asked. Repair logs from the last siren incursion. Looking at the damage pattern to see if it tells me anything about their targeting methodology. And does it? Preliminary answer is yes. They consistently prioritize command control infrastructure over combat assets. Which means they are thinking more strategically than a purely aggressive model would predict. She was quiet for a moment, processing. That is a more significant finding than it sounds. I think so. I'm not sure what to do with it yet. Formulate the question completely before you look for the answer, she said. Half-formed questions produce answers that are true but not useful. He looked at her. That is excellent advice. It is advice I was given by someone I trusted, she said. I find it holds. He finished eating in companionable silence, and when he set down his chopsticks he said, Thank you for checking on me. Belfast was concerned. I was also concerned, she said simply, since you ask. He did not say anything for a moment, just let that settle. You don't say things you don't mean. No, she agreed. I find it saves time. Then thank you for that too. She nodded, serene and unhurried, and poured him a second cup of tea without asking. The conversation with Enterprise happened at the harbor wall, which had become, in the 5 weeks since his arrival, a place he returned to when things needed thinking through. Enterprise seemed to know this and had a quality of appearing there when he needed someone to think with, which he had decided was either very good instincts or something more deliberate, and either way he was grateful for it. You seem tired, she said. Not with concern exactly, with observation. I am tired. Productively tired. Is there a difference? Productive tired means the work is working. Unproductive tired means you're spinning. I'm not spinning. She considered this. The resupply issue. Resolved. The Eastern Corridor protocol finding. Zuikaku showed me her draft submission. It's thorough. She works harder than she lets on, he said. Or maybe she lets on exactly as much as she works, and the answer is just a lot. A pause that he had learned to recognize as Enterprise finding something quietly amusing. She speaks well of you, she said. She spoke at me for 20 minutes the second time we met about a tactical error that turned out to be half correct. Yes, said Enterprise. That is how she speaks well of people. By engaging with them seriously. He looked at the water. I had people like that. Before. He paused. People who engaged seriously. It was the thing I valued most about them. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, the quality of her voice was slightly different, something under it that was careful and present. You miss them. Every day. And you do not talk about it generally. There's work to do. They tell me to focus on the work. Probably, she said. But they would also want you to be all right. He thought about Rias, who had said exactly that. Who had said it with the particular fierceness of someone who was choosing to love without conditions. He thought about Asia, who had said it quietly, with her hands folded and her eyes very clear. He thought about all of them, the whole complicated, beautiful constellation of people he had not chosen and could not have planned for. I think I'm going to be all right, he said. I'm working on it. Enterprise looked at the water alongside him. So are we, she said. The harbor lights caught the surface of the water and scattered, and somewhere out beyond the breakwater a light was moving, a patrol returning home through the dark. Chapter 8 Fault Lines. The message from Fleet Command arrived on a Tuesday morning, which seemed to Issei like a particularly unremarkable day for something that changed the shape of the next several months. He read it twice at his desk, set it down, and read it a third time to make sure he was reading it correctly. He was Fleet Command was assigning Ironblood Anchorage as the coordinating base for a joint operational exercise involving Eagle Union, Royal Navy, and Sakura Empire assets. Duration, 6 weeks. Start date, 18 days from receipt of this message. The exercise itself was straightforward. The complication was the scope, because coordinating assets from 4 different factions, with 4 different command cultures, 4 different operational traditions, and the various interpersonal histories that had accumulated between all of them over years of working sometimes alongside and sometimes at cross purposes, was not a tactical problem. It was a people problem. And people problems were the kind that did not resolve cleanly, that had second and third order effects, that required judgment about what was worth pushing and what was worth absorbing. He called a staff meeting for 9. The room filled quickly. Enterprise and Kaga from the Eagle Union. Belfast representing Royal Navy interests. Bismarck and a quieter iron-blood officer named Prince Eugen, who had a habit of watching everyone else in the room before she said anything. Shikaku and Zuikaku from the Sakura contingent. Ayanami sat near the door, which was where she preferred to be in large gatherings. She would be the clearest observer in the room, he knew. If he needed to know what was actually happening underneath the institutional surface, she would tell him. He laid out the assignment. He did it plainly, without optimism or anxiety, the facts and the timeline and the requirements. Then he stopped and waited. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. The coordination protocol, said Bismarck, not loudly but with a precision that made the room attend to it immediately, traditionally falls to the host base commander. Yes. You have been in position 6 weeks. Yes. Prince Eugen, who had not said anything yet, said quietly, Fleet Command is aware of this. Fleet Command, said Zuikaku, with the particular tone of someone who has opinions about institutions and is choosing her words, makes decisions from a distance. Fleet Command, Issei said before the thread could develop further, has made a decision that is now our working reality. I am not interested in cataloging the reasons it might be difficult. I am interested in the specific things we need to do to make it work. Those are different conversations. He paused. The second one is the one we're having. Another brief silence, this one with a different quality. Something settling rather than something building. The coordination structure, Belfast said, stepping smoothly into the space, will require liaison officers from each faction. Not supervisory, functional. People whose job is information flow rather than authority. Agreed, said Enterprise. And ground rules established before anyone arrives, not after. Expectations set in writing. The written expectations will mean different things to different factions, said Shikaku. Then we write them specifically enough that they don't, Issei said. That is harder, but it's the only version that actually works. They spent 3 hours in that meeting and did not solve everything. What they accomplished was more important. They identified the 10 or 12 places where things were most likely to break down, and they assigned each one a specific owner and a specific contingency. It was not a perfect plan. It was a functional one. After the room cleared, Bismarck remained. You handled that well, she said. It was not warm. It was accurate, which from Bismarck was its own form of something. I handled the beginning, he said. The rest is whether we can execute. You believe we can. I believe we can if everyone in that room does what they said they would do. He met her gaze. I believe they will. Bismarck was quiet for a moment. You trust them. I trust what I've seen from them. 6 weeks isn't long enough for certainty. But it's long enough for evidence. And if the evidence is wrong, then I adjust. But I don't operate from anticipation of failure. It makes the failure more likely. She studied him for a long, measured moment. Then she said, the first joint commanders who came through this base operated from anticipation of everything that could go wrong. A pause. None of them found it useful. He nodded. She left. He stood at the window for a moment, and looked out at the harbor, at the ships arranged in their careful patterns, at the figures moving between the buildings with purpose. 6 weeks of evidence. It was what it was. He would work with it. Prince Eugen arrived at his door at 7 in the evening with 2 cups of something that smelled strongly of coffee, and an expression that was studying him in a way that had been delayed until this moment. You don't have to, he said, but he stepped back to let her in. I know, she said. She set one cup on his desk and settled into the chair across from it with the fluid ease of someone entirely comfortable in her own skin, which Issei had noticed was not the same thing as being entirely open. I wanted to take your measure, directly, he said. It saves time. He sat. And? You are younger than your file suggests, and older than your face does, she said. You listen more than you speak. You ask questions that make the other person do the thinking. You managed Bismarck's hesitation this morning without making it a contest, which is not simple. She was right to hesitate. She was, Prince Eugen agreed. She is also right less often than she expects, which creates a specific dynamic with people who don't handle it carefully. You handle it carefully. I handle everything carefully. She tilted her head slightly. The question I came to ask is whether you understand what this exercise is actually for. He waited. Fleet Command does not convene for faction joint exercises because they want to assess tactical coordination, she said. They convene them because something is changing and they want to see how the factions respond when the ground shifts. The exercise is the test. The coordination is the cover. He was quiet for a moment, turning this over. What is changing? If I knew that precisely, she said, with a smile that had something complicated behind it, I would have said so already. What I know is the pattern. And the pattern says that 6 weeks from now, we will all know something we don't know today. And you're telling me this because you will make better decisions with the context than without it. And because, she said, standing, I think you are the kind of commander who repays investment. She left before he could respond, which he suspected was intentional. He sat for a long moment with his coffee, which was excellent, thinking about patterns and tests, and things that were changing just past the edge of his current knowledge. Then he picked up his pen and added a note to his planning file. When the ground shifts, he wrote, stand on what you know until you can see what you don't. Kaga found him in the training yard at dawn, which was where he had started going when the thinking at the harbor wasn't quite enough, and he needed to move. He had not told anyone about this practice. She was there already, running a kata through the light mist, and she did not stop when he appeared, but she acknowledged him with the particular precision that was her way of communicating without words. He ran drills alongside her in silence. It was comfortable in the way that shared physical effort sometimes was, both of them focused on their own work, the silence between them not requiring anything. After half an hour she stopped, and stood looking at him with her amber eyes in that way she had that was evaluating without judgment. You received news you did not expect, she said. Fleet Command. Joint exercise. 18 days. Ah. A pause. Do you have concerns? Several. I'm cataloging them. That is different from addressing them. Cataloging comes first. If you address before you catalog, you might address the wrong things. She considered this. Enterprise said you think carefully before you act. Enterprise is generous. Enterprise is accurate, Kaga said. She does not do generous with descriptions. He almost laughed. It was early enough and quiet enough that he let himself. No, he agreed. She doesn't. Kaga looked at the sky, where the gray was beginning to differentiate into color. When I am uncertain about a situation, she said, I focus on what I know to be true. Not what I want to be true. What I can verify. What do you know to be true about the exercise? The people in this base are capable. They have demonstrated it consistently. The relationship between factions here is functional because the individuals here are functional. She paused. The individuals arriving will be unknown variables. But the foundation is stable. He let that settle. It was accurate, and it was precisely the thing he had been telling himself less efficiently. Thank you. You have been good to work with, she said, in the plain way she said things, as though they were facts requiring no more weight than that. I wanted you to know it. The morning light was coming in properly now, turning the mist golden. He looked at the base laid out below the training yard, the harbor beginning to show its colors, the ships sitting steady in the calm water. I'm glad to be here, he said. Genuinely. Kaga said nothing, but she stood beside him for another minute looking at the morning before she turned and walked back toward the base. And in that minute there was something that communicated without requiring words, the same language Belfast used and Ayanami used, the language that said things mattered without saying what things. He understood it now in a way he had not 8 months ago. He was grateful for the understanding. Chapter 9. Before the Storm. 12 days before the joint exercise, the siren incursion that Fleet Command had been projecting arrived on a Tuesday evening without the courtesy of a confirmation signal. The alarm brought everyone to their stations in under 3 minutes. Issei was in the command center within 90 seconds of the alert, and in those 90 seconds the senior staff had already begun the automated defensive protocols without waiting for him, which was correct behavior, and had the operational picture on the main display by the time he arrived. Eastern approach, said Bismarck, at his shoulder. For confirmed contacts, 2 probable additional. Pattern suggests probing rather than assault. They're looking for the gap, Issei said immediately. Bismarck's head turned slightly. The patrol route. We haven't implemented the change yet. They've mapped the current route. He was already moving to the deployment board. We give them what they're looking for and we're waiting on the other side. Pull the 3rd Patrol Division back to standard position. Make it look like normal deployment. Put Zuikaku's Eastern Corridor unit in here, and here, where the gap used to be. A brief silence in the room. You want to let them through the old gap, Enterprise said. Into a position they think is undefended and isn't. Yes. If they're probing rather than assaulting, they will retreat when they find the resistance, said Shikaku. We won't eliminate them. But we'll know they've mapped our position. We'll also show them that the gap they've been tracking is closed. Whatever their intelligence cycle is, this resets it. He looked around the room. It also tells us how quickly they adjust, which is the more important data point. Enterprise and Bismarck exchanged a look, the particular kind that had a conversation in it, and then Bismarck said, execute. The engagement lasted 40 minutes. Zuikaku's unit, which had been ready and waiting with the particular coiled alertness of someone who had run the simulation enough times to see the situation in her sleep, met the probing siren force exactly where the projections said they would be. The engagement was efficient, controlled, and ended with the siren contacts retreating without achieving their objective. Damage report came back at 2200. Minor hull stress on 1 destroyer. No casualties. Clean, said Zuikaku, in the operations debrief, with a controlled energy that was the same as satisfaction expressed by someone who had learned to contain it professionally. The Eastern Protocol held. The Eastern Protocol worked because you built it correctly, Issei said. Note that for the record. She looked at him with an expression that was briefly undone, that quality of someone who had braced for something and found the opposite. Then she composed it. Noted, she said. After the debrief cleared, Belfast appeared with tea at his elbow with the timing that he had long since stopped finding startling and simply found grounding. He drank it gratefully. You knew, she said. About the gap. You've been waiting for it. I've been hoping I was wrong. I wasn't. You handled it correctly. We handled it correctly, he said. There was no version of that working without everyone in this room already knowing their jobs. She was quiet for a moment. You deflect credit consistently. I directed accurately. He set down the cup. There's a difference. Her expression had that quality again, the one that moved without quite admitting it. Is there anything else you need this evening, Commander? Sleep, he said. But first I need to write the after-action report, while the detail is still clear. Then I will leave you to it. She began to turn. Belfast. She stopped. You should know that when I think about what this place has come to mean to me in 6 weeks, he said, you are a significant part of that. I want to say it plainly because you say things plainly and I think it matters that you hear it that way. The silence lasted long enough that he thought he had perhaps miscalibrated. Then she said, very quietly, thank you, Commander. Issei. It was the first time. Good night, Belfast. Good night, she said and left. 5 days before the exercise, Ayanami appeared at his quarters at an unusual hour, 7 in the morning on a day he did not have early meetings, which meant she had come to tell him something and had waited until she judged it worth interrupting. The arriving units, she said. I pulled the operational histories. He opened the door wider. Come in. She sat with her usual composed stillness and set a folder on the small table. There are 2 individuals in the incoming roster who have a history with some of our current unit members. The history is not hostile. It is complex. Explained complex. There was a joint engagement 14 months ago in which command decisions led to significant losses on the Sakura Empire side. The decisions were made by an Eagle Union officer who is part of the incoming roster. He was quiet. Shikako was present at that engagement, Ayanami said. I do not know if she has spoken of it. She hasn't. She would not. But she will know when she sees the roster. He thought about this carefully. You're telling me so I can decide whether to say something to her before the roster is circulated. I am telling you because you would want to know. Both are true. He picked up the folder and looked at it without opening it yet. What would you recommend? Ayanami was quiet for a moment. Shikako does not require protection from information. She has more composure than most people have again her experience. What she might find useful is knowing that you are aware, so she does not have to carry the awareness alone. He set the folder down. I'll talk to her. Yes. Ayanami. How do you notice all of this? She considered the question as though it genuinely surprised her. I pay attention, she said. And I care about the outcome. He looked at her. I know, he said. I'm glad you're here. She did not respond immediately, and when she did it was very small and very real. I am glad to be useful, she said, which was the version of the same thing in her particular language. He accepted it in the spirit it was given. He found Shikako at her usual place in the records room that evening, and this time he did not pick up a folder and sit in comfortable parallel silence. He sat across from her and waited until she looked up. Commander Murasame is on the incoming roster, he said. She was very still. I know about the engagement 14 months ago. A pause that was longer than usual, and in it he could see, briefly, something underneath the composure that was not composed at all, something that had weight and time to it. Then it was contained again. I see. I'm not asking you to brief me on it or discuss it if you'd prefer not to. I wanted you to know that I know, so you don't have to manage my awareness of it on top of everything else. She was quiet for a long moment. That is, she said carefully, a thoughtful way to frame it. I learned it from you, actually. How you lay out information. What you put first. Something in her face shifted, very slightly, the structural element again, the nearness of something she did not often show. You observe carefully, she said. I had a good example. They sat in silence. The records room was quiet around them, the smell of paper and time. I have no grievance with Commander Murasame that I intend to act on, she said finally. The decisions that were made in a specific context. I have had time to understand the context. Understanding does not remove the memory, but it changes what the memory means. He started. That's a harder thing to arrive at than it sounds. Yes, she said simply. But arriving is what matters. He looked at her, this quiet extraordinary person who had processed something genuinely difficult and come through it with clarity, and he thought about the ORC, about the people there who had done the same in their own ways, and about how much of being human seemed to consist of arriving at difficult places and then continuing. Thank you for telling me, he said. Thank you for asking, she said. Directly. It was easier than carrying it would have been. He nodded. They sat for another half hour in the comfortable silence, two people who had said what needed saying and could now simply be present in the same space, and it was enough. Chapter 10 Assembly. The ships arrived on a clear morning with a northeast wind, and watching them come in from the harbor wall, Issei thought that whatever came next was going to be either the thing that tested everything he had built here or the thing that confirmed it. Possibly both, which was usually how testing worked. The Eagle Union contingent came first, which he had not expected, 3 destroyers and a cruiser moving with the crisp efficiency of units, who knew exactly who they were and what they were capable of. The officer leading them, a woman named Cleveland with a wide smile and a no-nonsense quality that reminded him pleasantly of Aquino on a focused day, shook his hand on the pier and said, Commander Hayato. We've heard things. Good things, I hope. Mixed, she said, but she was smiling. Which usually means accurate. He liked her immediately. The Royal Navy contingent arrived an hour later, neat and formal, and their liaison officer was a young woman named Sheffield who had clearly been briefed thoroughly on everything and intended to verify all of it independently before she accepted any of it. She shook his hand with precision and said, in the clipped way of someone from whom clipped was not coldness but the natural register of someone extremely competent, the coordination structure you proposed in the pre-exercise communication. I have 12 questions about it. We can address them now or in the initial briefing, he said. Your preference. She looked at him as though this was not the response she had expected. Briefing, she decided. But I will want them addressed thoroughly. I'll make sure of it. The Sakura contingent arrived last, and it was when the second ship came into the harbor that Issei saw Shikaku, who had come down to the pier in her official capacity, become entirely still for a moment. Then she composed herself, and continued as though nothing had changed, and he pretended he had not seen it, which was the correct response. By 11 in the morning all 4 factions were present in the base, and the coordinating briefing room felt like the beginning of something. Not precisely comfortable, not precisely tense, but alive, the way spaces feel when the people in them are genuinely trying to do something that matters and have not yet established the ease that comes from knowing whether they can. Issei stood at the head of the table and looked at the assembled faces, known and unknown, and felt the weight of the moment with the particular clarity that difficult moments sometimes had. Thank you for coming, he said. We have 6 weeks. I want to tell you what I want to accomplish in those 6 weeks, and then I want to hear from each of you, because the plan I have is built on incomplete information and you have the parts I'm missing. A brief, attentive silence. What I want is not a successful exercise. A successful exercise is the minimum bar. What I want is for every person in this room to leave at the end of 6 weeks with a genuine understanding of how the people from the other factions think and work and make decisions under pressure. Not strategic knowledge. Personal knowledge. He paused. Because the next time something comes at us that requires more than one faction to stop it, the time we lose figuring out how to work together is time the enemy uses. I want to spend that time now instead. The silence had a different quality now. Not attentive exactly. Considering. Cleveland leaned back slightly in her chair. That is a different brief than the standard joint exercise. Yes. Fleet Command approved this framing? Fleet Command approved the exercise. The framing is mine. She looked at him steadily for a moment. Then she glanced at Enterprise, who was seated to Issei's right, and who gave nothing away in her expression but gave enough away in the quality of her stillness that Cleveland seemed to find what she was looking for. All right, Cleveland said. I have the parts you're missing. Let's hear your plan first. Sheffield had her 12 questions, which he addressed methodically and completely. Shikaku asked one question, precisely placed, that reframed a third of the coordination structure in a way that made it more workable. Bismarck said nothing during the briefing, but her silence was the kind that was engaged rather than absent. Ayanami, near the door, watched everyone. By 1 in the afternoon they had a working plan. It was not perfect. It had the organic irregularity of something built by real people with real histories who had not yet established full trust. But it was honest, and it had been arrived at by genuine conversation, and those 2 qualities were, in Issei's experience, more durable than perfection. When the room cleared he stood for a moment in the quiet. Kaga appeared beside him. It was a good beginning, she said. It's a beginning, he said. We'll know if it's good in 6 weeks. No, she said. We will know if it becomes good in 6 weeks. It was a good beginning now. She looked at him. Allow the present its proper credit. He thought about that. He thought about Rias saying something similar, once, about allowing good moments to be good without immediately looking forward to what might complicate them. You're right, he said. Thank you. She nodded once and walked away, and he allowed the moment its credit, standing in the quiet room with 6 weeks ahead of him and a beginning that was genuinely good, and he let it be that, simple and real, for 1 full minute before he picked up his pen and went back to work. That evening he wrote another letter he could not send. He told them about Cleveland, who had a way of cutting to the center of things that he found clarifying. He told them about Sheffield's 12 questions, which had all been right questions. He told them about the morning and the ships coming in on the northeast wind. He told Rias that he was doing the thing she had always said he was capable of, which was leading without losing the part of himself that made leading worth doing. He told her it was harder than he'd expected and more meaningful than he'd hoped. He told Asia he was sleeping better. He told her the tea Belfast made was the closest thing he had found to the particular peace that Asia's presence had always carried, which was not the same thing but was something. He told Aquino that there was a woman here who had the same quality of knowing things without being told them, and that it made him feel both seen and extremely accountable, and that he had decided this was a good thing. He told Kaneko that Ayanami had the same economy with words and the same quality of care underneath the economy, and that he understood now what that kind of love looked like from the outside. He told Yuto that the records room smelled like the library at Ko Academy on rainy days, which was a ridiculous thing to miss, but he missed it. He told all of them, I am somewhere I did not choose and could not have planned for, and I am doing work that matters, and there are people around me who are becoming real to me in the way that you became real to me, which is to say slowly, and then all at once. He told them he thought about them every day. He told them he was going to be all right. He folded the letter and put it with the others, in the inside pocket of the commander's coat, and looked out his window at the harbor where the lights of 4 faction ships reflected in the calm water, and stayed there for a while in the dark, not thinking about anything in particular, just present, just here, just this. Tomorrow there was work. Tomorrow was going to be complicated and demanding and exactly what it needed to be. Tonight there was this. He let it be enough. Act 3, The Tide Turns. A story of fractures earned and bridges built, and what remains when the storm passes. Chapter 11, First Contact. The first 3 days of the joint exercise were, in Issei's estimation, less an operational exercise and more an extended exercise in competitive observation. Everyone was watching everyone else. It was polite, professional, and almost entirely opaque on the surface, which meant the real calibration was happening underneath, in the break-room conversations and the training yard mornings and the way people held their coffee cups when they thought no one was looking. Issei watched all of it. Cleveland's unit had a quality he had not quite anticipated. They were direct in the way he had expected, open with their opinions, quick to laugh, constitutionally incapable of leaving a silence that could be filled with something interesting. But underneath the openness there was a structure, a careful architecture of roles and responsibilities that was so internalized it didn't require discussion. They did not negotiate who did what. They simply knew. He found Cleveland in the Eastern Simulation Bay on day 2, running her unit through a scenario he had not scheduled. She had not asked permission, and she did not appear to think she needed to, which was accurate, but he made a note to address the communication gap before it became a pattern. Cleveland. She looked up from the display without guilt or apology, which he appreciated. Commander. We had a free slot. I noticed. The scenario you're running is a night engagement in restricted channels. Our weakest condition. I'd rather know now than find out during the joint exercise. He came and stood beside her at the display. Show me the results so far. She pulled up the data. He looked at it for 40 seconds and said, Your formation collapse in the 3rd minute is a communication latency problem, not a positioning problem. Your rear unit is receiving orders 4 seconds later than your lead. She stared at the display. That's, she started, a protocol difference between your fleet's communication standard and the simulation system we use here. I should have flagged it in the setup documentation. That's on me. Cleveland turned and looked at him with an expression that was recalibrating. You just gave me the answer before I finished forming the question. It was visible in the pattern. He paused. I'll get the technical team to patch the communication standard mismatch this afternoon. I would appreciate that. She looked at the display again, then back at him. You actually watch the sims. When I can. Most base commanders review summaries. Summaries are someone else's interpretation. I prefer the source material. She gave him the particular look of someone who is deciding whether to say the thing they are thinking, and then said it. Okay. I'm starting to understand what Enterprise's reports meant. What did her reports say? Cleveland smiled. That you were worth paying attention to. She turned back to the display. We'll restart after the patch. He left her to it. He had 3 other things requiring his attention before noon. But as he walked the corridor toward the technical bay he was aware of a particular feeling, something that lived at the intersection of gratitude and responsibility, the knowledge that people were investing in this, in him, and that the investment deserved to be repaid with full effort. He had known that feeling before. It had shaped him the first time. He intended to let it shape him again. Sheffield presented her 12 questions in the afternoon briefing with the systematic efficiency of someone who had organized them by category, cross-referenced them with the pre-exercise communication, and prepared follow-up questions for each. It was, Issei thought, genuinely impressive, and he said so. She paused. I had expected you to simply answer them. I am going to answer them. I'm also acknowledging that the preparation was thorough. Both things are true. A brief silence. Sheffield was, he had gathered, someone who received compliments by evaluating their accuracy before accepting them, which was a quality he found refreshingly honest. The preparation was standard, she said finally. Standard for you may not be standard generally. I've been noting that. She looked at him with the careful attention of someone who was deciding whether this was a compliment or a tactic. He let her decide without filling the silence. She arrived at an answer he could not read from her expression, but she moved on to the first question with a slightly different quality in her posture, something that was, if he was reading her correctly, marginally less guarded. They worked through the questions methodically. Most were structural, about the coordination protocol, and the authority framework and the escalation pathways. 2 were about the siren data from the recent incursion, which she had evidently already obtained from fleet records and had specific concerns about. The targeting pattern you identified, she said, on the 11th question. Commandant control infrastructure prioritized over combat assets. You flagged this in the after-action report but did not include it in the pre-exercise brief. I included it in the intelligence summary that went to faction liaisons last week, he said. The pre-exercise brief focused on exercise structure. The intelligence summary used cautious language. Preliminary finding, subject to further analysis. Because it was a preliminary finding subject to further analysis at the time of writing. He paused. Has something changed that? She looked at him steadily. My fleet has 3 additional data points from engagements in the past month that match the pattern. The room was quiet. He absorbed this. You should have led with that, he said. I am leading with it now. I wanted to understand your analytical framework first, before I contributed data to it. A pause. You might have been wrong. That was prudent, he said. Share the data points after the briefing. And Sheffield, Commander. When you have information that might affect operational decisions, bring it early. Even preliminary. I would rather have uncertain information promptly than confirmed information late. She considered this. That is a preference, not a universal standard. In my command structure it is a standard. He said it without edge. It applies to everyone here. Understood, she said. And then, after a beat, I will adapt. He nodded. They finished the 12th question. It was Prince Eugen who told him about the dinner. She appeared at his door on day 3 at 6 in the evening with the expression of someone delivering information they have decided he needs even though he did not ask for it, which was becoming familiar enough that he simply opened the door wider. There is an informal gathering in the officers' mess tonight, she said. Cleveland organized it. It was intended to be between the Eagle Union and Royal Navy officers. It has expanded. How expanded? Currently, everyone. He blinked. Cleveland organized a dinner that has spontaneously included all 4 factions. She mentioned food. The rest followed. Prince Eugen's expression had the quality he had come to associate with her finding something quietly delightful. I thought you should know so you could decide whether to attend. What would you recommend? Attend. Arrive 15 minutes late so the conversation has already started. Sit in the middle of the room, not at the head. Eat the food, do not conduct business. He regarded her. You've thought about this. I think about social architecture, she said. It is one of the more interesting games. Is this a game? The most important ones always start this way. She tilted her head. You understand the difference between people who are cooperating because they have to and people who are cooperating because they want to. Tonight is the first step toward the second kind. He arrived 15 minutes late. The mess hall was noisy in a way the base had not been in the first. She was quiet. Then, Shukaku is better than I deserve. I think she would say that forgiveness is not about deserving. Another pause. You know her well. I know how she thinks. She told me once that arriving at difficult places is what matters. Murasame looked away down the corridor for a moment. When she looked back, Something in her face was different. Not softer exactly. More present. What do you need from me, Commander? Your full attention and best effort for the next 5 weeks, he said. Which I already expect. Beyond that, nothing. She nodded. Once, the same short efficient nod Zikaki used when something had been decided. They went back to their respective work. The second fracture was between Cleveland and Sheffield, and it arrived on day 11, and it was, as Prince Eugen had predicted, about something changing. He heard about it from Kaga first. Then from Belfast, who delivered the information with her usual precision and also with the quality that meant she was more concerned than her tone revealed. Then he saw it himself in the afternoon coordination meeting, the particular angle of silence between two people who have said something to each other that is still in the air. He did not address it in the meeting. He addressed it afterward, separately, which was the only version of addressing it that could work. Sheffield, he said, after the room had cleared. She remained. She had known he would want to speak with her. The Eagle Union's proposed adjustment to the second phase scenario, she said. They're framing positions Royal Navy assets as the supported element rather than the supporting element. That is not the agreed protocol. Is the disagreement about the role designation or about what you think the role designation signals? A pause. Both. The role designation in the scenario is a simulation parameter, not a statement about operational hierarchy. Cleveland knows that. She framed it that way deliberately. He thought about this. You may be right. I'll speak with her. What I need from you is the commitment that the scenario adjustment, if it's corrected, resolves the matter for now. Sheffield was quiet. It resolves the immediate matter. Is there a longer matter? A longer pause. There is a pattern in joint exercises where the Eagle Union's flexibility is treated as the standard and other factions' frameworks are treated as rigidity requiring accommodation. I am not accusing anyone here of that. But the pattern exists, and when something looks like the beginning of the pattern, the instinct to name it arrives before I can assess whether the instinct is accurate. He heard this carefully. Thank you for saying it plainly. You asked for plain communication. I did. And what you've described is real, even if this specific instance may not be an example of it. I'll make sure the scenario framing is neutral before it goes live. And Sheffield, Commander, if you see the pattern developing here, bring it to me before it becomes a situation. I cannot address things I don't know about. She looked at him steadily. That requires a degree of trust. Yes, he said. It does. She considered him for a moment with that evaluating attention she always brought to assessments. Then I will. He found Cleveland 10 minutes later. The scenario framing, he said. She had the grace to be direct about it. I was testing something. I know. What were you testing? Whether the Royal Navy liaison would raise it or absorb it. She raised it. What does that tell you? Cleveland looked at him with the expression of someone who has gotten an answer and is deciding what to do with it. That she's paying close attention and is confident enough to push back. Yes, he said. Which is what you wanted to know. You have it. Change the framing. Already done, she said. And then, with the quality of someone who does not apologize for experiments, but can acknowledge their costs, I'll tell her it was a testing error. Cleaner. No, he said. Tell her you were testing and what you found. She will respect the honesty more than the correction. Cleveland thought about this for a moment. Then she nodded, the same short nod, and went to find Sheffield. He did not know exactly what was said between them. But by the evening meal they were talking in the way that people talk when the air has been cleared, not easily, not without the memory of the thing, but forward, and forward was what mattered. Belfast found him on the harbour wall that night, which she rarely did. She was usually precise about his space and her own. The fact that she had come to this place, which she knew was where he went to think, told him something before she said a word. Sit down, he said. If you want to. She sat. She sat with the careful posture she always had, but with something in it that was less armored than usual, like someone who has made a deliberate choice to set something down for a moment. You have been managing a great deal, she said. That's the role. I am aware. I am not questioning the role. I am acknowledging that management at this intensity, of people with histories that intersect in complicated ways, is different from management of logistics and tactical planning, and the difference has a weight that does not always show in the operational record. He looked at her. In the evening light she was as composed as always, but there was something underneath it that he had only seen in those brief moments, when she permitted it, something genuine and searching. "I'm all right," he said. "I know," she said. "I am saying so because you are also allowed to not be all right, and I want you to know that I would notice either way." He was quiet for a moment with that. "Belfast. Commander. Issei. You said it once?" A pause. "Issei. Why did you come here tonight? Specifically?" She was quiet for long enough that the harbor made 3 complete wave cycles against the wall before she spoke. "Because I wanted to, and I have been in the habit of not acting on wanting to, and I decided that was not a useful habit to continue." He absorbed this. The honesty of it was significant, coming from her. He knew what it cost someone who moved in precision and cared to say something that imprecise, that open, and he did not want to handle it wrong. "I'm glad you came," he said. She said nothing for a moment. "Then I brought tea." She produced 2 cups from somewhere with the manner of someone who plans for contingencies, and he laughed, a real one, surprised and warm, and she did not quite laugh, but the quality in her expression was close to it. They sat at the harbor wall and drank tea in the dark, and it was simple and sufficient, and it meant what it meant without either of them needing to say more. Chapter 13. Under Pressure. The siren incursion on day 14 was real. Not a probe, not a test. 7 confirmed contacts on the northern approach, coordinated in a pattern that the analysis team identified within 4 minutes as deliberate, and deliberate meant they were not trying to find the gap. They knew where the gap was. They were exploiting it. Except the gap no longer existed. Issei was in the command center in under 60 seconds. The joint exercise had been running for 2 weeks, which meant the command center now contained personnel from 4 factions, each of them at stations that had been carefully negotiated during the first days of the exercise, and what he needed from them in the next 90 seconds was for that careful negotiation to operate at full speed under real conditions. Northern approach, 7 contacts, coordinated assault pattern, said the duty officer. They're aimed at the communications array. Commandant Control Infrastructure, Sheffield said, from her station. Not a question. Yes, Issei said. Same targeting pattern. Bigger force, direct assault instead of probe. He was already at the deployment board. They'd decided the probe didn't work, and they're committing. Enterprise was beside him in the quiet way she moved. What do you need? First division covering the array. Second and third on intercept. I want Cleveland's unit in the channel approach because they know it from their night training, and I want the Royal Navy assets covering the eastern exposure because Sheffield's data suggests a secondary contact is possible there. Secondary contact confirmation is 18 minutes away at current, Bismarck said. I know. We deploy against the confirmed threat, and we preposition for the possible one. If the secondary contact doesn't materialize, we've lost nothing. If it does, we're ready. A beat. It was Bismarck's beat. The command center held its breath. Execute, Bismarck said. The next 40 minutes were the most demanding Issei had experienced in 2 months on the base, which was saying something. The communications array defense held because Cleveland's unit was exactly where it needed to be and because Cleveland herself had the particular quality of reading a fluid engagement in real time that went beyond training into something more instinctive. The intercept ran clean with one exception, a siren contact that broke from the main formation and went for the harbor entrance instead, which was not in the expected pattern. Zuikako had anticipated it. He did not know exactly when she had made the judgment, only that when the contact broke formation, her unit was already positioned to intercept it. He found out later that she had run a modified version of the scenario 3 times in the simulation bay the previous week, including the variant where one contact broke from formation toward the harbor. She had not told him about the preparation because it had seemed, at the time, like excess caution. He added a note to his files. Zuikaku's excess caution has earned its own category. Trust it. The secondary contact Sheffield had flagged appeared at 38 minutes, southeast approach. 2 contacts moving with a patience that suggested they were waiting to see how the main engagement resolved before committing. The Royal Navy assets Sheffield had positioned were waiting for them. The engagement ended at 42 minutes. Damage report. 2 destroyers with minor hull stress, no casualties, communications array intact, all siren contacts either eliminated or routed. The command center held the particular silence that came after something real, when the adrenaline was still present but the outcome was confirmed, and people needed a moment to let that settle. Cleveland said, into the silence, that was, and stopped. Yes, said Sheffield, from across the room, and she sounded, for the first time, genuinely warm. It was. Issei leaned on the edge of the deployment board and felt the tiredness arrive now that the intensity had passed, the productive kind, the kind that meant the work had worked. After action in 2 hours, he said. All senior staff. Eat something first. Enterprise was at his shoulder. You should eat something too. I know. He straightened. Where's Belfast? Behind you, said Belfast, and she was, with tea, which was so precisely her that he felt something loosen in his chest that had been held tight for 42 minutes. Thank you, he said. You handled it well, she said. All of it. We handled it well. She accepted the correction with the quality that meant she was not entirely agreeing but would not argue the point. The after-action meeting lasted 2 hours and produced more useful operational data than any scheduled simulation had. The conditions of a real engagement, imperfect and pressured and with actual consequences, revealed things that even the most rigorous simulation could not fully replicate. The microsecond hesitations when a real contact changed behavior unexpectedly, the ways people from different factions had slightly different instincts about when to report and when to act. The communication rhythms that had worked and the ones that had stalled. He let the room talk. He asked questions more than he made statements. When the room had finished extracting everything it could from the data, he said, The exercise has been running for 2 weeks. The sirens did not care about our timeline. We just ran the real exam with 2/3 of the preparation time. A pause. What I want to know from each of you is not what went wrong. I want to know what you would do differently. Not recriminations, not analysis of other people's decisions. Your own. What would you have done differently? The answers that came were, in his experience, some of the most honest things people said in rooms like this. Zuikaka said she would have briefed him on the harbor entry scenario variant she had run, because anticipating alone was not the same as coordinating. Cleveland said she would have established a direct communication line with Sheffield's position at the start rather than routing through the standard channel. Sheffield said she would have escalated the secondary contact prediction from possible to probable 2 minutes earlier. Nurasame said she would have recognized the formation break variant faster, and that the recognition time had cost approximately 90 seconds of reaction window. She said it plainly, without defense, and no one in the room made it mean more than it was, which was a professional after-action observation. He watched Shikaku receive this, and he watched her face do nothing except listen carefully and then ask, in her precise way, a follow-up question about the recognition parameters that was substantive and forward-looking. He noted, they are building something. After the meeting, Ayanami appeared at his shoulder in the corridor. You saw it, she said. Shikaku and Nurasame. Yes. I saw it, he said. They walked together for a moment in companionable quiet. You are good at allowing things to happen without directing them, she said. That is harder than directing. I had very controlling instincts for a long time, he said. I learned that they were often less about the situation and more about my own anxiety about the situation. She considered this. That is a useful distinction to make. Took me longer than it should have. Most useful distinctions do, she said. That night he found Zuikaku on the training yard steps, not training, just sitting with the particular stillness of someone who is processing and has chosen a location where processing is permissible. He sat down beside her. The harbor variant, she said. You were right to prepare for it. I should have told you. Yes, he said. But the reason you didn't is that it felt like the kind of thing you handle yourself, because handling things yourself is what you do. She was quiet. I know, he said, because I have the same instinct. The part of it that's about competence is useful. The part of it that's about not wanting to seem like you're asking for help is not. Zuikaku looked at the parade ground below the steps, the lights of the base picking out the familiar shapes of the buildings. I've been doing this my whole life, she said. The preparing alone thing. I know. It works. It works up to a certain scale, he said. Above that scale it starts to produce gaps. Because the things you prepare for alone are the things you know to prepare for. The things someone else would have told you to prepare for are the ones that get you. She thought about this for a long moment. Like the communication latency Cleveland's unit had. Which I caught because I was watching a sim I hadn't scheduled. Which I would not have watched if I hadn't made it a rule to watch the source material. He paused. Preparation alone and preparation together are different tools. Both necessary. Neither sufficient. Zuikaku was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You're telling me to trust people. I'm telling you to tell people things. Trusting them with what you found. That's different from hoping they do their part." She looked at him. "You learned this the hard way." "Everyone learns this the hard way," he said. "Some people take longer than others. You're not taking that long." She made the sound that was somewhere between a laugh and an exhalation. The one he'd learned meant she was arriving at something she hadn't expected. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he agreed. They sat on the steps until the bass had gone to its late-night quiet, not talking much, the silence the kind that was comfortable now in the way that took time to earn and was worth what it cost. Chapter 14. What Ground Shifts. Prince Eugene came to him on day 17 with the news that the exercise was what she had said it was. She arrived at his quarters at the unusual hour of 10 in the morning, when he was between meetings, which meant she had timed it deliberately, and she brought a folder of documents that had the particular unmarked quality of materials that had not come through the standard intelligence chain. "Fleet Command," she said, setting the folder on his desk, "has been receiving the same targeting data we have. The Commandant Control Priority Pattern. They have been receiving it from multiple bases over a longer period than we knew." He looked at the folder. "How long?" "The earliest confirmed data point is 11 months ago. The pattern has been developing systematically. They are building towards something. Not probing. Mapping. Mapping every Commandant Control node they can reach." "Yes." She paused. "Fleet Command believes the next phase of Siren operations will involve a coordinated assault on multiple command nodes simultaneously. The joint exercise was designed to test whether four-faction cooperation at the command level was operational before that phase begins." Issei sat back. The information had a weight to it that was not exactly surprising, because Prince Eugene had predicted it, but was different in concrete form than in theory. "When?" "Unknown. The pattern suggests an acceleration in the timeline. Months, not years. You said they'd tell us something at the end of 6 weeks that we didn't know at the beginning. They're telling us now." "Yes." "Because the engagement 2 days ago confirmed the pattern to them too." "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "You need to brief the Joint Staff. Today." "I know." He was already thinking through the structure of it. Who needed to know first, and in what sequence? Bismarck, then the faction liaisons, then a full briefing this afternoon. "And you need to write to Fleet Command that this base's Joint Staff is ready for the coordination role they are about to be asked to play." "Is it?" Prince Eugene considered him with the quality that meant she was being honest rather than encouraging. 14 days ago, no. Today, substantially yes. A pause. "You accelerated the timeline. The real engagement helped, but the groundwork you laid before it is what made the real engagement work." He absorbed this. "What do you need from me?" "I am Ironblood," she said. "I need you to be the thing that holds the room together when it hears this and decides what it means. Because it will hear it differently from 4 different places, and the first hour after the brief will determine whether the 4 different places become one working body or 4 separate organizations that are politely worried. No pressure." "All the pressure," she said, and there was something almost warm in it. "Which is why I am telling you now, so you have the afternoon to think." She left him with the folder. He sat for a long time with it, thinking not about tactics or protocols but about the room he was about to walk into, the specific people in it, what they would each hear when they heard the same words. He thought about what would need to be said and what would need to wait until after the first reaction, and what questions to ask rather than statements to make. He thought about Rias, who had always known how to hold a room not by controlling it but by being so fully present in it that the room organized itself around her. He thought about what she had told him once, that the trick was not to need the room to go a particular way, just to need it to go somewhere real. He needed it to go somewhere real. The briefing was at 4 in the afternoon, and it went the way important things go when the groundwork has been laid and the people are ready even if they do not know they are ready. He told them plainly. He gave them the data in the order that made it comprehensible, not the order that made it least alarming, because making it least alarming required treating them as people who needed managing rather than people who could handle truth. The silence after he finished lasted 12 seconds. Then Cleveland said, in a tone that was entirely steady, "How confident is Fleet Command in the timeline? Months, not years, with current trajectory. No confirmed date. And their assessment of our readiness for coordination at that scale. They are assessing. This exercise is part of that assessment." Sheffield said, "The 12 questions I brought at the beginning of the exercise. The coordination protocol questions. They are more significant than I framed them." "Yes. Then the protocol needs to be stress-tested before this exercise ends. Not simulated. Actually tested, under conditions as close to real as we can manufacture." "Agreed. That is now the primary exercise objective." Murasame had not spoken. He looked at her. She met his gaze. "The engagement 2 days ago," she said. "We handled it." "Yes. Then we are closer to ready than we were when we arrived." "Yes," he said. "That is precisely what I believe," Bismarck said from her end of the table, with the precision she always brought to her most important statements. "The question is not whether we are ready today. It is what we need to do in the remaining time to be ready for what is coming." "Yes," he said. "That is the question. Tell me your answers." They told him. He listened, wrote, questioned, listened again. The room worked for 3 hours without stopping except to eat the food Belfast produced at the 90-minute mark with the timing that he had learned to read as her telling him, in her language, that she was present and the people in this room were being cared for. At the end of 3 hours they had a plan. Not a perfect plan. A real one. Kaga found him at the harbor wall that night, which she had apparently decided was now an acceptable place to find him without ceremony. "The room held," she said. "The room held. You look surprised. I knew the people. I've seen what they're capable of individually. I wasn't entirely sure what they were capable of collectively under real stakes. Now you know. Now I know." She stood beside him and looked at the water. The harbor was quiet, the lights of the 4 factions' ships reflecting in their different patterns, distinct and present, and occupying the same water. "What you built here in 17 days, she said, "most exercises do not build in 6 weeks. I had good material. You had good material, and you used it well. Both things are true." She paused. "I have watched many commanders manage joint exercises. The ones who manage them as logistics problems produce logistics solutions. The ones who manage them as people problems produce something that lasts." He thought about this. "You managed me. In the first days. I observed you. I provided information I thought you could use. That is different from managing." Barely. Something happened in her expression that was Kaga's version of amusement, small and real. "Barely," she agreed. They stood in comfortable silence. The night was cool and clear, the stars visible above the harbor, and he looked at them and thought, as he sometimes did, about the stars above the beach the morning he arrived, wrong stars over a strange shore. They did not feel wrong now. They felt, increasingly, like his. Chapter 15. The Letters We Write. 4 days before the end of the exercise, Issei sat at his desk late at night with the particular kind of tired that came from weeks of sustained effort, not exhaustion, not breakdown, but the deep bone-level weariness that meant you had done as much as a person could do in the time available. He had managed 12 things today. 8 of them had gone well. 3 had gone adequately. 1 had gone wrong in a way that was recoverable but would require attention tomorrow. He had eaten breakfast, forgotten lunch, and Belfast had produced food at 3 in the afternoon with the quiet firmness of someone who had decided reminders were no longer sufficient and intervention was appropriate. He had eaten the food. He opened his desk drawer and took out the paper and the pen. He wrote. He told Rias that he had done the things she had believed he could do. That he had found a room full of capable, complicated people with real histories and genuine differences, and he had not tried to flatten any of it, and the result was something that worked, something that was more than the sum of its parts, something he was proud of without feeling the need to be modest about it, which he thought she would approve of. He told her about the engagement on day 14. He told her about watching the command center function in real conditions with people who had been strangers 17 days before. He told her it had felt, in the way that the very best moments felt, like something being confirmed rather than something being discovered. He told Aquino that Prince Eugen had the same quality she had of knowing what was actually happening in a room while appearing to simply be present in it, and that he had become very respectful of that quality over time and also very aware that it meant nothing went unnoticed, which was occasionally humbling. He told Asia about the dinner on day 3, the spontaneous expansion of a small gathering into something that included 4 factions and a lot of food and the particular noise of people who had stopped performing cooperation and started actually experiencing it. He told her she would have been in the middle of all of it immediately, that she had a quality of making people feel that their presence was the thing the gathering had been waiting for, and that he had been trying to cultivate a version of that without having her natural gift for it. He told Kaneko about Ayanami. He told her everything, the peer conversations and the folder on his desk and the 7 words that had contained more than most people managed in paragraphs. He told Kaneko that some people expressed their entire interior landscape in 7 words and that he had learned to listen for those words the way you listened for things that arrived quietly but meant completely. He told Yuto about Murasame and Shikaku, about what it looked like when 2 people decided to stop carrying something and start building forward. He told Yuto that he had watched it happen across a planning table and that it was one of the most quietly extraordinary things he had seen since he arrived, which was saying something, because the past 7 weeks had contained their share of extraordinary things. He told all of them that the thing Prince Eugen had predicted was true, that something was changing and he was now part of the structure that would need to respond to it, and that this was at once larger than he had expected and more natural than he had feared. He told them he was still the same person, that the commander's coat and the unfamiliar stars and the months of hard work had not changed what was central in him, that he still thought about them every day, that he still kept the letters in the inside pocket of the coat, close enough to feel. He told them he missed them. He said it plainly, without the careful framing he sometimes used when he was managing the grief of it. Just, I miss you. Every day. In a way that does not go away but that I have learned to carry alongside everything else. He told them he was all right. He folded the letter and added it to the others. On the last day of the joint exercise, Issei stood at the pier and watched the ships prepare to depart, and felt the particular shape of an ending that was also a beginning. Cleveland found him there. Word got around, she said, that you don't do farewell ceremonies. Ceremonies feel like conclusions. This isn't a conclusion. No, she said. It's not. She looked at the ships, her ships, the familiar shapes of the units she had led here. You know what you built. I know what we built. She smiled at the correction. What we built. Yes. A pause. When the next thing comes, and it is coming, the people in this harbor are going to be the thing that holds. Because of these 6 weeks. Because of the work everyone did. Because you gave us the space and the structure to do it, she said, with a directness that meant she was not interested in false modesty. Accept it. It's true. He looked at her. Accepted. She held out her hand. He shook it. Until next time, Commander Hayato. Until next time, Commander Cleveland. She walked back toward her ships. He watched her go. Sheffield appeared at his other side, which startled him slightly, because Sheffield had the quality of arriving precisely when intended, and he had not intended her arrival at this moment. I wanted to say something before I left, she said. Go ahead. The 12 questions I brought. I remember them. I brought them because I expected to need to correct inadequacies in the coordination protocol. I did not expect to find a protocol that was genuinely thought through, or a commander who answered the questions completely rather than defensively. She paused. I was wrong about what I would find here. You were cautious. That's different from wrong. She looked at him with the evaluating attention that had softened, over 6 weeks, without losing its precision. Yes, she said. That distinction matters to me. Thank you for making it, Sheffield. For what it's worth, I think your 12 questions were the right questions. Every one of them. She was quiet for a moment. Then I know. It was not arrogance. It was the simple acknowledgement of something she had been certain of, and had not previously been told was seen. She left. He stood at the pier until all 4 factions' ships had cleared the harbor mouth, until the water was quiet again and the base had returned to its own particular rhythm. He stood until the last light of the afternoon had gone amber and the first stars were visible. Different stars, once. His stars now. Enterprise found him last, as the pier emptied and the base settled into evening. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks. Fleet Command will want a full report. I know. I'll start it tonight. She was quiet for a moment, standing with him in the way she stood when she had something more to say and was deciding the right form for it. When I found you on the beach, she said, I had a report of a heat signature and a civilian who did not belong here. I had no basis for what you would become in this place. Neither did I. I know. She looked at him with those sharp gray eyes that saw what was there and reported it accurately. What I have found is a commander who leads by genuinely caring about the people he is responsible for, who learns faster than most experienced officers, and who has built something in this base that was not here before and that will matter when it needs to. He was quiet. That is what I will tell Fleet Command, she said. Exactly that. Enterprise. Issei. Thank you. For the morning on the beach. For everything since. She said nothing for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had a quality underneath it that she did not often allow to surface. It was my honor, she said. He recognized the words. He knew whose language she was borrowing, and he knew she knew he recognized it. They stood at the harbor wall in the early dark, and the stars came out one by one over the water, and the base was quiet around them, and he was here, genuinely here, in a world he had not chosen and had learned to claim, with work that mattered and people who were real to him in all the ways that mattered. Tomorrow there was more work. There was always more work, and he was grateful for it. Tonight there was this. He let it be enough. He let it be more than enough. He let it be everything that it was. Thanks for listening.